Hello everyone, I'm very glad that you listened to my story. Please give me a follow and like the video if you enjoyed it. Feel free to comment and provide feedback so I can improve the sound quality. Yes, I will now continue the unfinished story. Chapter 21, A fellow brother loses the most important thing to him. Rena didn't give the poor monster any time to lament on its fate, instantly following up with a fireball spell. This spell wasn't a skill, but something similar to a default attack. After all, could a mage be called a mage if they couldn't even cast a spell? It was the same as a swordsman not even knowing how to swing a blade. The AI would at least equip every class with a basic attack outside of their skills. The attack slammed onto the already blackened skin of the poor private rank bear, tearing away a solid 25 HP. While it may be a private rank monster with trash tier magical defense, it was after all, scaled to Draco's level as the party leader. While its actual level may be a measly 3, the other higher ranked monsters reached up to level 10. Rena and the rest were only level 1. How could they bridge the level gap so easily with their average skills? In fact, the damage output of the flash flame attack as well as her default attack being so impressive was solely due to the bear's crappy defense towards mystic arts. Had Boyd or Uno tried something similar, they'd be lucky to do even 10% of that. The Ursuling in charge of the squad wasn't about to sit there and watch as one of its boys was brutalized by human SCU.M. With a roar of anger, it moved to lead its subordinates to vanquish these weird humans and defecate on their carcasses. However, was Draco a statue that stood there to be bypassed? Of course, since he dared to provoke the monsters, he had 1,000 ways to play them to death. With a harumph, he gave the approaching monsters the side eye. Humph, nothing but a bunch of Pandaren washouts. Not even willing to accept a loss. Explains a lot if you ask me. His tone, which had been like an indirect rebuke, had angered the monsters so much that their eyes reddened and their breathing became ragged. While others may not know the lore of locations, races, and people in Boundless, Draco did. Of course, he didn't know everything, just the important stuff that almost everyone else in his timeline knew. One such thing was the caste society of bears. There was a clear distinction between each class of bears, which wasn't about bloodline or the like, but power. In their family of monsters, the top dogs were the humanoid pandas, the Pandaren. This race were masters of physical arts, producing great martial artists and sages in every generation. In truth, the Pandaren had a good relationship with humanity, as both races sought the Deo in one way or another. However, the polar bears were next in line. They were a mix of bipedal and quadrupedal members, with a stronger connection to the earth than most other races, despite being confined to the icy regions of the world. After that came the poor Ursas, who were seen as nothing more than humanoid beasts with low intelligence. This wasn't exactly wrong, but no one liked being called an idiot. Especially, well, an idiot. Not counting that these monsters here were bottom-tier Ursa, even high-tier Ursa might feel the flame of hatred towards Draco's stabbing words. The charging monsters came to an abrupt stop as they gnashed their teeth in pain and anger. The effect of Draco's words were the same as one dude in a group of male friends being called a chicken. No matter what they were being pushed to do, it was hard to resist from doing it, despite knowing the consequences. This was the conundrum these beasts were in. They could only watch on as their cuckold brother got his hide tanned by the flames of Rena the Mage Queen, who at this point was cackling in glee from the pleasure of causing torment to another being. She clearly had a few screws loose up there, but which good woman didn't? Besides, someone who killed people for leisure like her would definitely have a problem or two. Even Draco had his own issues. With a mix of skills and her default attack, Rena managed to stir-fry the poor private rank monster to death. The beast collapsed to reveal some copper coins and some extremely poor materials for crafting. Like the miser she was, Rena pocketed everything while looking around rapidly, as if fearful that someone would steal her bounty from her. The rest of them looked away, pretending not to see her. It was so embarrassing to have to know someone like this. Boyd, you're next. Draco pointed to the group of monsters who were cowering in a corner. Rena's vile expression while she sought pleasure from the pain of others had scarred them for life. Even the Ursuling's legs were trembling. It knew that it was far stronger than Rena, but couldn't muster the will to move from its spot. It was the same way a fully grown adu.l.t might be scared of a little spider, even though they could squash the bug very easily. Boyd shrugged and attacked one of the other private rank bears, pulling it closer to him. Even if the monster was terrified, it couldn't resist its natural instinct to retaliate upon danger. The two traded blows for a bit, Boyd becoming the eventual winner. His poleaxe had cleaved the monster's head into two. Because of his powerful structure, as well as the heaviness of his weapon, he could use it for attack and defense. The head of his axe alone was almost as wide as a conventional shield. Draco and Cobra were of average height, about 5'10". Kiran was tall at about 6'1". Boyd and Uno were monsters at 6'5". Rena was slightly taller than Draco and Cobra. In fact, Uno and Boyd were able to stand face to face with the huge Ursuling, which was one of the reasons the other group felt apprehensive. Next up was Uno himself. The legendary godless paladin wielded his hammer and shield like the tank he was. The hammer was shaped like a bell, with its back hooked into a sharp spike. The front was used for smashing and the back for piercing. A pretty versatile weapon as long as one could get used to the weight. Uno seemed to be fine with the weapon, swinging it about as if it weighed less than a feather. This battle was a bit different from Boyd's where he and the monster rapidly exchanged blows to decide a winner. This one was one-sided, as the poor monster had to exert its every muscle to dodge the swings of the hammer. What a joke! The width and the diameter of the hammer was far bigger than its head. If that thing hit it for even 1 second, it would have to say goodbye to its family at home. This led to a battle of attrition between the two, to see whose stamina was of a higher digit. Eventually, the bear came out on top and Draco had to save Uno from being ripped apart. Uno was strong and fit, but the stamina of a bear was not something to be underestimated, especially since that was one of its strengths. It's not shameful to lose. What's shameful about it is to ignore the lesson from the loss and repeat it again. Spend some time ruminating on the battle and think about what you could have done better. Draco patted Uno on the shoulder and chuckled at his despondent expression. That goes for you too, Boyd, and you as well, Rena. You may have won, but that was only because you had some slight advantage over the monsters due to equipment and combat specialty. Your skills were below par in your fights and there were thousands of things you could have done more efficiently. Uno only lost because he had no advantage over the bears, so it came down to a contest of skill. If you were put in the same place, you might do worse or just about the same. Draco's words poured cold water over the growing heads of Rena and Boyd, who had been looking at Uno with disdain and condescension. They immediately humbled themselves and stepped back to ponder over their fight. Cobra, you're next. I know that as an assassin, you excel at sneak attacks and premeditated murder, but that doesn't stop you from acquiring excellent close combat skills. You have speed as your strength and that is the weakness of these monsters. Use it. Cobra nodded and pulled out a dagger. He bent low on his knees and prepared to leap forth. Draco almost spat blood when he realized he could see the contours of the fellow's body in a way he didn't like. Even as Cobra fought against his enemy, Draco had to suffer it out and watch, so that he could give his advice afterwards. Kiran had it easy as he just looked away, to which Draco cursed him endlessly in his heart. After Cobra's fight, Draco made an audible gasp of relief. He just gave him some simple remarks and told him to ruminate at the back. Draco hadn't realized that he'd been sweating profusely the whole time. Kiran gave Draco a pitying look before stepping forth to attack one of the private rank bears. Unlike those before him who had no idea of what they were doing but were just improvising, Kiran displayed almost the same skill as in the real world. The only person who fought almost as well as Kiran was Cobra, because he used knives in the real world too. Draco knew these two wouldn't need much combat adaptation, but rather just a general understanding of the world's mechanics. After clearing the remaining enemies himself, Draco led them through the dungeon, forcing Rena, Boyd, and Uno to fight majority of the private rank monsters. Draco made Cobra and Kieran fight specialist rank monsters together, and the two managed to win more often than not. The group became more proficient with their builds and gained a better understanding on the do's and don'ts of combat in the world of Boundless. Of course, one couldn't become a sage after reading a book just once. Their progress was admirable, but not even scratching the edges of Draco's skill, even in comparison to him in the previous timeline. By the time they had reached the end, the group looked more stable and mature. Normally, a person would get tired after hours of combat, but if it were so, how could players play this game for long periods of time? The AI had implemented a feature that reduced the build-up of stress. That way, players could fight until their bodies became weary, but their minds would stay sharp. Of course, with the helmets, that feature was really limited. With the pods that allowed one to become fully immersed, that limitation no longer existed. One could fight for days and months non-stop as long as they had the stamina to burn. This was one of the reasons Draco could become a control master at such a young age. An environment where he could train and fight for a limitless amount of time with no real consequences was a dream for anyone focused on physical improvement. The boss is around the corner here. Our job is to brutalize him until he can't be recognized by his own mother. Are you up for that? Rena had an excited expression her face at the prospect of causing agony to the boss. Boyd and Uno just fist-bumped each other and had evil smiles. Cobra licked the blade of his dagger and nodded his head. Kieran stretched a bit and narrowed his eyes with malicious intent. Draco was proud of his people. They were as twisted and evil as he was, and he loved them for that. Without wasting any further time, they entered a wide cavern with sconces at regular intervals and a lot of broken-down mine carts around. In the center of the area was a hulking mass of monstrosity, like an Ursaling maximized by about 3 of itself. Name, Ursa, Captain Rank Monster. HP, 150,000/150,000. Of course, being a dungeon boss meant for a 10-man raid, its health was abominable. If Rena's base damage output was 150 DPS, she'd need to attack for 16 minutes non-stop, assuming her mana would hold out and the boss would lie there to get wrecked. But of course, that wouldn't happen, hence the need for 10 men with different builds/classes. This was a prime reason why the AI had to implement the stress relief feature. After spending 2 hours clearing monsters, who'd have the energy to fight such a boss? The boss noticed the 6 immortal adventurers approaching its location and felt amused. When Draco and Co brandished their swords, it even let out a smile. It was a smile every parent gave their child when they did something silly. An indulgent and lax grin that made the receiving party feel slightly ashamed and annoyed. Naturally, the 5 generals became a bit heated from the patronizing gaze. Draco stepped forth and eyed the monster for a bit before talking. "Big fat bastard, get down here and kowtow to your ancestor grand uncle." Surprisingly, the monster didn't get angry, rather bursting into laughter. With a reasonably heavy accent, it spoke English as it responded to Draco's taunt. "Silly human. I know the gods have mandated your kind to fight us, but I feel reluctant to harm children like you." The Ursa had the look of a Buddha as it spoke, and Draco saw a blinding light start to glow off its form. A sun seemed to rise from behind its back and coat the whole cavern with the light of warmth and love. Could the monster have achieved Zen? But only Pandaren masters could reach such a state. Draco was understandably flabbergasted. He couldn't understand how a common Ursa could achieve such heights. It was akin to a chicken becoming a control master all of a sudden. It was something even impossible in fiction. Draco could feel his brain starting to short-circuit from calculations. Could this be the legendary breaking boundaries, achieving the Deo in spite of impossible odds? As such, I would like you children to do me a favor and break both your arms and legs, castrate yourselves and kowtow to me 1,000 times before I decide what to do with you next. Ah, so that was it? The monster had definitely achieved Zen, but not in the Dao of love and warmth, rather in the Dao of arrogance. It was so arrogant that the universe had appointed it as its inheritor for that particular law of reality. Draco had an ugly look on his face. He had always hoped to be the chosen inheritor for the Dao of arrogance, but it went to **ing anthropomorphic bear. With hate in his eyes and killing intent in his heart, he sped forth to attack the boss monster. Naturally, the Ursa never expected to be attacked so suddenly and by such a fast enemy. Before it could even say anything, it realized that something was missing down there. Taking a look down, it noticed that the rod of power it had treasured all its life had suddenly detached and fallen to the floor in a bloody heap of flesh. For a few seconds, it just stared with a lack of comprehension, wondering what on earth happened and why its donger was on the floor. Suddenly, a light of understanding came to its eyes and it nodded to itself. It must have been cut off by that speedy human, that's right. It laughed with a mis.e.m.e.nt as it realized its own silliness. How could it not have realized this before? That was its own donger in a pool of its own blood. Slowly, the laughter stopped as it felt something strange creeping up from its loins. First it was a slight tingle, to an annoying itch. By this time, its expression had become calm and it wore a smile. Then the feeling morphed into a slightly painful irritation, then slowly to recognizable pain. By this time, its smile had frozen and it began to sweat all over its body. Then came agony. It was then that the Ursa let loose a cry filled with so much pain and sorrow that all the males in the cavern couldn't help but tear up. A fellow brother had lost the most important thing to him. Chapter 22, Bullied to Death. However, Draco still had an expression of hate still on his face. This fellow had lost himself to his anger due to the silly reason of losing out on the inheritance of the Dao of arrogance. Instead of giving the poor boss monster time to mourn its loss, he laid into it like a wild beast. Chunks of flesh and whole tufts of fur were tossed about the place as he brutalized the monster. His DPS hovered between 1000 to 1500. He did almost 10 times the damage as Rina, and this was taking into consideration that he had the same equipment as they did, a rare weapon and common armor from the master package. Granted, Draco had some other boons that players would die for, so that was the reason his output was more than 10 times that of Rina. The other generals just watched the scene with bizarre expressions on their faces. Our boss, doesn't he seem a little off? Rina couldn't help but put the question forward. He's fallen into madness. The only way he'd come out is either by the unrealistic scenario where he awakens through encouragement by a loved one or the target of his hatred is destroyed. Kiran made a calm assessment to which the others nodded to. Sounds reasonable. I think that's logical. A rational conclusion. Boyd, Uno, and Cobra gave their responses to his appraisal of the situation with looks of respect. Rina became starry-eyed and looked at Draco with a hopeful gaze. Does that mean if I go forth and offer my comfort, the boss will love me? Definitely not. Bitch, you will die. No, go ahead. I promise nothing bad will happen. Woman, if you want to see hell so quickly, let me show you the way. Kiran, Boyd, Uno, and Cobra replied to her question with varying responses. Rina simply sighed with regret and had a downcast look on her face. When will this big sis finally be able to nab the heart of our handsome boss? No one responded to her anymore as they had focused solely on Draco's violent beatdown. By the time the Ursa mustered the will to fight back, its health was a bit below 70%. With a roar of anger and pain, its skin reddened and its eyes became the color of crimson. A shockwave blew out from its body and pushed everyone back a few steps. This seemed to cool Draco down as his expression became somewhat serious. He leapt back and approached his team, taking the vanguard position as he started giving out orders. Uno, you will tank the boss by taking the hits with your shield. Remember what I taught you, dodge if you can and focus on deflecting attacks, not blocking them. Boyd and Kieran, you will rush forth with me to form the close combat attacking party. We will each focus on one cardinal direction around the boss and concentrate our attacks from there. Cobra, you will choose the final cardinal direction and lay in wait. Your job is to attack at key moments to either distract or deal immense damage. Rena, you stay within maximum range and cast your auto attack only. No spells. We can't afford to have you pull aggro with your current skills and no healer. Draco nodded to each of them and they displayed serious expressions. It was good to know that he hadn't spent the last few hours teaching a bunch of slow-wit imbeciles. All right then, let's go. With a quick command, the group leapt into action as they took their positions around the boss. Naturally, the initial aggro was focused on Draco due to him being the object of the boss monster's hate. Draco took a position to its east flank and dodged its attacks while he allowed Uno to cast his uncommon paladin skill, Taunting Throw. This was a ranged attack that forcefully attracted aggro to the user for a maximum of 30 seconds by throwing their shield in a similar manner to Captain America. Uno easily caught his rebounding shield after the throw and prepared to receive the boss attacks with a serious expression. Draco nodded to him and activated the Fire of War only. Even using that was a bit of overkill, but he wanted to end the fight quickly so he could take his team on a few more runs. Uno tanked the boss surprisingly well. It wasn't too strange since the fellow was a top-tier fighter in the real world, so all he really needed to learn was how to factor in game-related elements into his fighting. He chose the tank pre-class build because he usually took on hits from others in the fights he participated in. His fighting style was simple: rush in and grapple the enemy. While he couldn't obviously do same here, the underlying concept of using his sturdy frame to mitigate damage while seeking to attack was there. And that's what made Uno special in the previous timeline. Majority of tank class fighters had developed the mentality that their only job was to receive hits and let the others handle the damage output. Uno had drawn the line and opened a new field of play by tanking while also focusing on dealing damage with status effects, mostly stuns thanks to the hammer. Kieran was like the wind. His palms moved so fast that the others thought he was as fast as Draco. Naturally, in Draco's eyes, all of them were moving as slowly as snails if he didn't focus on limiting his perception to the normal level. Still, he wasn't surprised by Kieran's skills. Only he knew that Kieran had been the second strongest in Hellscape. Chances were that after Draco was assassinated in the previous timeline, he took over. Draco had never really bothered to look into Kieran's life in the past and just took it at face value, but now he was curious about the fellow. Boyd had learned to fight using one eye and the normal limitation on impaired sight seemed to not bother him. His poleaxe cleaved whole pieces of the boss's skin and fur away, leaving bloody wounds and causing pain-filled screams. His style wasn't exactly skillful, but it was certainly effective since he put an absurd amount of force behind it. Some of his cuts even went as far as to expose small pieces of bone, to which the others grimaced. Rena had been casting non-stop. She followed Draco's advice and stuck to casting her auto-attack fireball instead of using channeled spells. Draco had explained to her that spells that required channeling had great power in combat, but very little utility. It could do almost 4x your usual damage at the very least, but if you missed or you got interrupted, the consequences weren't worth it. Cobra attacked infrequently and his piercing stabs were always trained on either boss nape or the small of its back. By attacking these tender areas, Cobra had been able to force the boss into a stunned state whenever Uno became overwhelmed or aggro suddenly shifted, greatly lessening the stress on the rest of the team. Draco simply swung his sword multiple times in a single second, leaving thin trails of blood wherever it passed. When he moved to a different section of the boss's body, the others noticed that the lines of blood formed into the pattern of a lotus flower that had bloomed. When they realized that Draco had enough time to doodle on the boss monster in the middle of such a fight, they became flabbergasted and a bit more fearful. With Uno and Boyd doing around 55 damage per hit, Rena doing 95, Cobra inflicting 80 and Kieran causing 50 damage per attack, it didn't take them long to fell the boss monster. Naturally, this could only be done so quickly because Draco's base damage was over 3000 with the addition of the Fire of War. The others couldn't even feel good about leveling up twice from defeating the boss with their guild leader being a monster in his own right. Congratulations on completing Ursa's Cave Normal Mode. Time elapsed, 4 hours 52 minutes and 47 seconds. Enemies killed, 254. Team members, 6/10. Assessment, A+. 150% EXP. 10 gold. Naturally, since this wasn't survival mode and the method of completion wasn't as outrageous as when Draco soloed a dungeon, the rewards were a bit more normal now. Still, an A+ assessment was definitely uncommon and only achievable by uncommon guilds. Players ranked guilds differently from the system. The ranking system was the same as used for weapons and items. Trash tier, common, uncommon, rare, epic, legendary and divine. Hellscape had been one of the 5 guilds at the divine tier. Darkrow had been another and the 3 others had been located in different sections of the map. Draco had never bothered to encroach on their territory and they had kept off his. The boss also dropped some loot in the form of uncommon weapons and armor pieces and 1 potion recipe. The recipe was for the basic health potion, which was a standard recipe that any player could acquire. Still, Draco didn't mind as he could let another player in his guild learn it for production in his shop. That person would help alleviate the pressure on him and he would have more time for various things. One thing about Boundless that made Draco feel aggrieved on behalf of other players was that there were no stupid limitations on creation. That meant, one didn't absolutely have to learn a recipe or design in order to craft an item. This allowed architects, chefs, and a myriad of other creative professionals from the real world to be able to find a place in this world without having to always swing a blade. After all, if every one of the 7 billion humans on Earth entered Boundless and focused on battle, the competition would be far too fierce for most. Naturally, some things were limited in order to maintain the ambience of the world. Those who focused on tech couldn't create any technical item whatsoever. One guy had tried to get away with making a transistor but was eventually hunted down by the player base after the AI issued a lucrative quest. The AI had both punished the offending party and sent a message to the rest, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Lord knew why such an intelligent existence would work for humans still. That mean that Draco, who had done a heavy amount of crafting in his past life, was unstoppable since his memories of the previous timeline were now easily recollected. After all, this fellow had crafted the best player-made weapon in the history of Boundless, his semi-legendary mana sword. He had already made basic health potions and mana potions for his shops in the War of Attrition area. As such a design was pointless to him. Unfortunately, since the game has to keep in some measure of competition in each sector of life, designs could not be shared without following the proper process. So Draco couldn't write down the recipe for the basic health potion and hand it to Kieran. The AI would immediately issue a quest against him and he'd get F***ed. While he could tear apart almost any player in the game, he didn't want to annoy the AI and have it mobilize the NPCs. The Umbra Guild have cleared out the Ursa's Cave and gotten first clear of the dungeon. Reputation increased by 2000. This one was limited to a kingdom-wide announcement because it was an area dungeon. There were continental dungeons and world dungeons, but the difficulty level of those couldn't be compared to area dungeons. Even with Draco's skill and boons, he didn't have any plans to tackle those types of dungeons anytime soon. One thing about standing at the top was that one always knew when to attack or retreat and pride rarely ever dictated one's actions. Unless you were a fool, of course. Alright, let's head out and tackle the next one. Upon exit, the group wasted no time heading to another local dungeon in the general area of stagnant Moss Town. That day, various first clear announcements by the Umbra Guild made players of Sturgehaven Kingdom curse and swear. Some filed complaints and others tried to mute notifications, both of which were a waste of time. However, these actions led various interested parties to conclude that the first guild, Umbra, was based in Sturgehaven Kingdom, or at least, its guild leader was. Majority weren't interested in the guild itself, but the fellow who seemed to be able to attain multiple game announcements in the span of 2 days since launch. Of course, it was the early game, so very few had the time to leave their pre-selected base of operations just to hunt down one elusive fellow, but most of the thrill-seekers and independent players began making a pilgrimage to Sturgehaven to see what this fellow was all about. Of course, others trekked with the intention to catapult to fame by challenging him and taking him down. The fellow himself was currently having a great time tormenting an undead skeleton warrior by making bone puns as well as harsh comparisons to other types of undead. The poor monster had gone past the rage stage into the depression stage, and was curled up onto a ball while shivering from sorrow and low self-esteem. Can you imagine? A measly skeleton like you that has only 206 bones wants to move the heart of that banshee deeper in the dungeon? Dream on. Draco's harsh words made it clutch its head in pain. Of course she only likes real undead with that one extra bone in their body. The one that you'll never have, ha. Boyd took this chance to drive in the hurt. Not even a single muscle. Just bone all around. And you expect an entity like her to reciprocate your feelings? You'd be better off dying and reincarnating, my friend. Trash. Uno started pushing towards a dreary ending. And even as a skeleton, your bone density is below average. You think a filthy generic monster like you can stand out in a crowd? You are nothing special. I can find 100 like you anywhere. Cobra sneered at the aggrieved undead. Waste. Common debris. Kiran's apathetic look and toneless words did more harm than a long derogatory speech ever could. It was as if the fellow were looking at a piece of sand, and even that sand was low-quality filth. Suddenly, the skeleton heard clacking footsteps and a woman in a tight and sexy red dress knelt down beside it. Upon wondering who was here to torment it, it was shocked to see that it was an astoundingly beautiful woman with a gentle expression on her face. That expression reminded it of the banshee it loved, who was also a gentle soul as long as there were no livings being around. She had made that same expression to it countless times, and she channeled reconstruction magic to mend its dislocated bones after fighting adventurers. This made it lower its guard and see the light of hope. Especially, when Rena took its bony hand in hers and smiled lovingly. It felt like this might be the real form of its love, and maybe it had finally ascended to heaven, finishing its contract with the lich that ruled the dungeon. Its heart opened up and basked in the warmth and love being sent its way. The euphoria was intoxicating, liberating, allowing it to ascend to heaven from hell. I only wish you could realize how ugly and useless you are. I feel pity knowing that you genuinely think you deserve life, even in undeath. That banshee woman who you fancy must suffer being around you just as I do. I only project such kind feeling because I feel like no one else would, not even your mother, with such an ugly f***ing face. The world seemed to pause in that moment as those words that were uttered were digested by everything, even the wind. When understanding dawned on all the parties who heard Rena's destructive words, the world resumed once again. However, the light that burned inside the skull of the undead had long flickered out. It had chosen to extinguish its life in order to escape this torment. It had literally been bullied to death. Chapter 23, Crafting 1. After clearing a few more dungeons, the levels of Rena and Co. had increased handsomely. It wasn't easy to just jump levels, since the AI always balanced experience gains in every aspect. After all, it had granted Draco a ton of experience and gave him a way to dump it later. Now, the fellows sat comfortably at level 7 each. Getting them to climb higher would require either solo play or an increased investment of time. Draco opted to have them perform the former. Draco himself was sitting at a comfortable 67% of level 13 at the moment. Naturally, vanquishing all those bosses had given him quite a few gains. Unfortunately, running dungeons with other party members meant that experience was split, so Draco could not gain an abominable amount of experience so easily. Alright. You lot seem to have a fair idea of how to piss correctly. For now, I have other things to do, so you can go ahead and scram. Despite Draco's rude words, the five didn't even react to it. Over these past few hours of playing together with this leader, they had all been awed by his prowess and rendered speechless by his sharp mouth. They each filed off to seek their own bit of fame and fortune. Draco felt a strange feeling of satisfaction while looking at their retreating backs. In his past life, his relationship with them was strained at best. They were simply vassals and he was their master, that was all. Here, they bullied others together, joked with each other and generally had fun while adventuring. Before, each of them would pale at the very idea of even mentioning his full name in a casual manner. Sigh. Reincarnation could either be a blessing or curse. For some, the idea of redoing everything seemed long and undesirable. Most would prefer to just redo small events and leave others as is. But some, who had made mistakes at every juncture till it all formed one huge mistake in hindsight, were like Draco, who were thankful for being able to do it from scratch. Enough messing around and delaying. I should get it done. Draco turned towards a certain direction and blinked closer to his destination. It was time to end this small-scale skirmish going on in the war of attrition and to reap his big reward. Once again taking the form of Draco entered the guild outpost with a small smile playing on his lips. This time around, his aim was to check up on his shop as well as earn big by annihilating the indigenous villages manned by Zane. Draco noticed that there was a healthy patronage of his shop, with more than 70% of the outpost's residents browsing through the wares. When the people saw him enter, most greeted him with a smile and a little bit of enthusiasm before becoming engrossed in their perusals. Draco chuckled at this. Because his blacksmithing, alchemy, and enchanting skills were too low, he couldn't create certain specific pieces of equipment and items. Why was this so? After all, Boundless didn't limit one from making anything at any level. Certain rarer pieces of equipment and items required specific materials and environments to create. Should one expect Draco to forge the real Excalibur with iron ore? This was one of the main limitations with trade skills. If you knew how, you could create a broken sword that defied all logic. However, you'd have to find the materials as well as the combination that would allow said sword to even exist. Is Sasha around? Draco asked a random shopper with an amiable bearing. She went behind to the storage area in order to fetch certain orders a while ago. Draco acknowledged and approached where Sasha was said to be. There, he saw the dainty and sweet girl struggling to carry some heavy pieces of equipment to the counter. Immediately, Draco was filled with a strange feeling of warmth. It was similar to how one would look at their child or pet doing something so silly while looking so cute. Hello Sasha. I see that you're hard at work. Let me help you with that. Draco offered while forcibly taking the heavy load off her hands without even making a sound. Sasha, who had been burdened with what seemed like a trillion tons of weight, suddenly felt light and free. Coupled with the fact that her Prince Charming had suddenly appeared to save her from this painful task, she felt so elated that her face flushed. Because of how pristine and snow-white her skin was, such a reaction was obvious and added a certain allure to her that was different from Zane's but similarly appealing. Lord Drake. I was moving these items for some customers. I'm sorry for not being there to welcome you. She mumbled with a guilty expression. Draco simply chuckled and patted her head gently. Don't worry about it. Rather, I'm worried that such a weight was being borne by someone important to me. I'll go ahead and hire some fellows to help you with this task, what do you say? Sasha's face flushed even deeper when Draco affirmed that she was important to him. While beaming happily, she replied, N. Let's walk together while we talk. Who ordered for these items? Draco asked while returning to the shop front with Sasha in tow. It was my brother. He ordered some heavy equipment so that he could create and train a heavy legion. He also ordered for some of the best spears as well as medium armor for a special shock troop platoon to act as the vanguard, she replied with a smile. Hearing her firing off military terms made Draco feel a bit surreal. Seems like she wasn't part of the planning council just due to her familial relation to Anguis. Still, Anguis wants to create skilled troops in his army, huh? I'm starting to think that choosing this outpost was a really good idea. Despite the fellow's bluntness, Draco felt Anguis was a friend worth making. Such a person who could think outside the box despite his youth and could put up a respectable resistance despite being outmatched was definitely destined for great things. Draco assisted Sasha with the distribution of the equipment. His strength stat easily allowed him to do such a simple task without breaking a sweat. Afterwards, he chose some young fellows with admirable musculature to become her helpers in the shop. He also chose one other fellow as her direct assistant to manage the more miscellaneous tasks for her. Strangely enough, the person Draco chose was Tony, who took up the employment with unparalleled enthusiasm. After all, while Draco had positive feelings towards Sasha, it was more like a big brother than a lover. Seeing that the Tony fellow was smitten with her, he decided to help the fellow out a bit, to which Tony secretly kowtowed to Draco in thanks. Draco simply shooed him away with a casual smile. Ever since he'd began training his generals and getting closer to them as a friend more than a tyrannical boss, his demeanor and outlook had slowly changed. He was less vindictive and petty, becoming more amiable and calm. Of course, that was assuming that you showed him the required respect. Also, this had nothing to do with his goals. At heart, he was still an evil bloke. If he was required to annihilate this very outpost to fulfill his objectives, he'd at most sigh in regret while slaughtering them as if he were a stranger. More than 10 years of evil and callousness couldn't be so easily changed. After sorting all that out, he directly blinked to his abode in the mountains. This place had an already set up sleeping, bathing and crafting area. It also had a living area for receiving guests, but Draco had no plans for anything like that. When he was in Cario City, Draco had chosen to purchase reagents, materials, and soul gems to craft some new items. The ones he had put up in the store last time were pretty basic overall. This time, his aim was to make something more unique. Now to narrate his process, one must first understand how the crafting in Boundless worked. The AI made crafting laughably easy, simplifying the process into 3 segments: preparation, action, and completion. The preparation stage was the act of selecting the right tools and components as well as making them ready for the action stage. This included smelting, heating and filtering. The action stage was where the actual work took place, or the large majority of it. This included the shaping, sharpening, and cooling. The completion stage was the easiest. It was essentially a system menu with 3 options: enchant, augment, and reforge. Enchanting was the process where the careful usage of special magical knowledge fueled with soul energy, granted an item a boost that did not change its physical makeup in entirety. This was an artificial growth, through external means. Augmenting was essentially folding, but at the end of the smithing process. In other words, one could add certain components to organically increase stats, but this changed the physical makeup of the item. One could add a steel coat over a bronze sword to make it harder, but this would end up making it heavier as a consequence. Reforging was self-explanatory. At the cost of extra components, one could break down what was made and attempt it all over again for a better result. This was the exact reason why, despite starting out with only being able to make poor quality items, most crafters didn't have a single one to show. Who would dare to try and sell a trash tier item? No one who had any self-respect would. Draco began by taking out some orichalk.u.m ore from his inventory and placing it into the smelting furnace. One would ask, why bother having levels in trade skills if anyone could make anything? There was no demarcation zone for ability, so what was even the point? The answer, it was vital. While knowledge was not limited to levels, application was. Even if Draco knew how to smelt or like Hephaestus himself, he could only follow of the rules of Boundless. And the rules were simple. The higher your trade skill level, the easier the process of crafting. For example, a person with only 3 levels in blacksmithing would fail 100% of his refinement of rarer ores like adamantium or mithril, whereas someone with over 80 levels would have a 30% success rate. Similarly, the higher your level, the easier the refinement of more common ores. Once one reached higher levels than the 100% requirement for certain ores, the refinement became less costly. If one needed 5 iron ores to smelt an iron ingot at blacksmithing level 20 with a 100% success rate, one would need only 4 at level 30, 3 at level 40 and so on. It would reach a point where one could save more on materials while making more money. Such a system was surprisingly realistic too, as it was a fact that more expertise or familiarity in a field saw a person become more efficient in it. Draco was only at blacksmithing level 4, so he had a 25% success rate when refining common ores. However, orichalk.u.m was a rare ore that had a much more stringent refinement rate. His current rate was barely 1%. That was not including the benefits of the Fire of War. He currently had a permanent boost to his forging success rate by 20% due to the passive granted by the Fire of War, forging efficiency. Still, Draco went through quite a few failures before succeeding once. This burned through not only his supplies but his time too. After all, refinement wasn't an instant action. Each batch required nearly 15 minutes, meaning that he had been at it for hours on end. The single successful set was put aside while he continued to go at it. Draco had a single-minded focus on his work that alienated everything else from his scope of attention. This was an ability everyone who grasped the void of perfection could easily emulate, as it was a foundational requirement to be able to even start comprehending the skill. Likewise, his blacksmithing level also rose steadily. This also bled into his player experience but at a much slower rate. After all, how were trade skill players supposed to progress in the game aside from combat? They earned experience at a slower rate because combat involved life and death, to which death had a severe penalty. Since these sitting sport crafters didn't have to risk anything except their wallets and want to earn same as those brave fellows. Keep dreaming. More than 10 hours passed as Draco refined batch after batch, which only 10 batches of the ores managed to become ingots. Each set of ores for orichalk.u.m cost 30 silver, which was a heart-rending amount. Clearly, no one would waste such money to buy such an expensive ore at such a low level. After all, with low refinement success rates, a lot of that money would be sent down the drain. Even various NPC factions would hesitate to do so unless the crafter had a significant chance of becoming a master. Amateur, elite, expert, master and grandmaster. These were the 5 demarcation zones for any trade skill. Each classification was separate into 20 levels. So level 1 to 20 was amateur, level 21-40 was elite and so on. A master class player would have a significantly high success rate and efficiency, meaning more equipment sets for less materials. So investing in promising talents by throwing money was easily made back in the future. The level demarcation zones also had other limitation and benefits, but those were for later in the crafting session. Draco was too focused to run through these basics while refining. Of course, the law of higher to lower in RPG games applied here. Essentially, doing something that was above your level would grant more benefits experience/loot wise in most games, and the same held in Boundless, especially looking at how Draco got his Battle Maniac title. This was why Draco chose to use almost all the gold Anguis paid him to buy rare materials for blacksmithing, alchemy and enchanting. This would see him gain levels in his blacksmithing skill rapidly while making money by crafting slightly more valuable sets to be sold in his shop. One should be aware that the prices Draco penned down for items in the shop were 50% higher than in the towns and cities. The reason he could do this and get away with it was simply because the fellows at the guild outpost were unable to return to the cities for supplies. The Adventurers Guild was a well-respected and noble establishment not for its benevolence, but its incomparable might. They were able to suppress kingdoms, continents, and other guilds due to this very fact. Organizations did not become strong by coddling its members. Each forward outpost was given objectives to fulfill and equal supplies at the start, but management by the individual sent would see differing outcomes in their battles. Anguis Outpost was one of the brutally mismanaged ones. Naturally, Anguis wasn't the leader sent by the guild. He was, after all, just a rank 1 rune maker. He was probably just a miscellaneous helper at the time. Now however, due to the pressure, the fellow has displayed excellent tactical ACU. Men, and this was what the guild wanted to see. Carbon didn't sprout up from the ground shouting ha ha ha, your father, I am precious. Come mine me if you dare. It required intense pressure to be refined into diamond. After a total of 15 hours, Draco stopped his rampant refinement and threw away the myriad ruined batches into the trash heap. Out of almost 60 batches, only 15 came out successful. A refinement rate of 25% wasn't too abysmal objectively, but when considering the price of the material used, it became horrifyingly unacceptable. Without the help from his forging efficiency passive, Draco would be lucky to get even a 5% success rate. Still, almost 18 gold was burned in less than a day. For scale, that was the equivalent of $540,000. Who could spend that money without thinking 3 times beforehand? Even billionaires will stop to ponder whether such a sum was worth it. However, Draco, this bastard, was able to do so without blinking. After all, this fellow got a whopping 3,000 gold from vanquishing Ratchet. He should have gotten more from doing that survival dungeon, but the AI was extremely unwilling, so it gave him rewards of equal value. Now that Draco was done with refinement, he proceeded to arrange his tools and heat up the forge. Since orichalk.u.m was a rare ore, it didn't require any extra work in the preparation phase aside from refinement. It didn't require filtration because it was a magic ore, unlike common ores like copper or iron. Draco began the arduous forging process. Melting the ingots, shaping them with his hammer through incessant pounding at regulated intervals and then reheating again to keep it malleable. This type of metal had magical properties, meaning it was more receptive to enchantments, but the downside was that it was hard to heat and even harder to shape. Unfortunately for the rebellious orichalk.u.m, Draco was a seasoned forger who had reached master rank in his past life. His forging technique had been named 3-pound origin by himself. It focused on using his powers of control to hammer the metal to perfection. His void of perfection enabled him to inspect the metal down to its very atoms, while his body of godliness allowed him to use the optimal force in the optimal position while shaping the weapon. He timed his hammer strikes into 3 bursts, hence the naming of the technique. Honestly, anyone who had grasped control could utilize his technique, but then again, how many people grasped control? In his past life, after 15 years and majority of the 7 billion humans in the world playing Boundless, there were less than 10,000 control masters. This number included those who had grasped only the void of perfection or body of godliness without the other technique. Nothing needs to be said of this timeline where control was relatively new. There were probably less than 20 control masters in the world, while majority were old farts with one step into the grave. Draco's 3-pound origin technique had one advantage, and that was its efficiency. It was quick as well as unparalleled in quality of work. In less than half an hour, he had managed to work the unruly orichalk.u.m into a blade shape, one that was of refined-looking bastard sword. He took the piping hot metal and brought it near the grinder while letting it run. The sharpening process had to be done while the blade was still hot for maximum effectiveness. That was precisely why a fresh sword was better than a used sword that had been recently sharpened. This stage was also monitored by his control abilities. Having the blade sharpened too strictly would yield it easy to chipping during sword fights. With a satisfied nod, Draco brought the sharpened blade up with his tongs and placed it in a vat of water. Steam rose and billowed about the room due to the sheer heat of the blade. Draco soon pulled out the cooled blade and placed it on his workbench. The sword was a bright reddish-brown color, slightly similar to copper or bronze. He smiled slightly before moving on to the next blade. In a matter of hours, he had produced 15 blades of the same color and quality. However, their shapes were a bit unique with a sharper point and thinner widths. One might even look and assume they had low density, but upon wielding the swords, they'd realize that they were much more formidable than they looked. Chapter 24, Crafting 2. Draco moved on to designing the hilts for these swords. He chose a reasonably unique style, with a dragon head for the crossguard and a relatively thick grip. The pommel was styled into the shape of a curved tail, this one also of a dragon. Clearly, Draco had decided to let the mythical beast that he was named after be the sigil for his creations. The dragon soul saw this and gave a thumbs up, as if saying, "Not bad kid, you tend to be smart every now and then too." Draco ignored the arrogant soul and moved on to the completion phase. A screen popped up asking him if he wanted to either enchant, augment, or reforge the item. Naturally, Draco chose enchant. Now enchanting was 1,000 times more complex than any other trade skill. This was because it wasn't a simple matter of selecting what you want from a menu and adding soul gem to get the result you want. Firstly, one had to learn and memorize all the runes and pronunciations of the enchantments. This was a bit difficult, but easy enough since most runes were 2 to 4 letters to make a word each. They were also simple enough in translation, so it could be memorized. But it was the drawing of the runes that was hard. Of course, those of Asian descent and those who practiced calligraphy had a head start over everyone on this. Runes were noticeably similar to the symbols used in Japanese, Chinese and Korean languages, although not exactly the same. Assuming one could master the two above, there comes the limitation set by the trade skill level. That came in the form of fusing the runes together to achieve the required effect. Runes were separated into 3 categories: naming, power and execution. Naming involved deciding upon the type of rune you're trying to make. If one was trying to make an enchantment for a dagger, one would use the dagger rune, tse. Similarly, if one was aiming to make a sword enchantment, like Draco, he would use the sword rune, sin. The power aspect was simple. This essentially was the utilization of the rune in which one wanted to be the main source of power for the enchantment. For example, fire. The fire rune was, Hua. If Draco wanted to make a flaming sword enchantment, he'd use the fire rune. If he wanted to use an ice one, he'd use the ice rune. The execution section, however, was the true cut-off point for enchanters. This was where the enchanter would decide upon how he wanted the power aspect to be utilized by the item. Don't look at the previous 2 segments and think it was simple thing. The execution section alone can take up to 50 runes to get right depending on what you were trying to achieve. Draco directly drew the runes onto the word with willpower. Nothing exaggerated like dragon's blood, mermaid's tears etc. were needed, just plain willpower to coalesce the runes into being. Still, to achieve such an effect was difficult for most, because it required you to know every single contour of the rune to will it into formation. Just taking a cursory glance and memorizing the general outline wasn't enough. Sin, Huo, Porukarira. Sword, fire, focus into strike. It wasn't a simple fire enchantment Draco used. Most fire enchantments sought to have the fire cover the sword as a whole or focus on a single point for simplicity's sake. What Draco made would see the enchantment support the strike as a whole. However the user decided to wield the weapon, the enchantment would be there to give its support. This was typically called a dynamic rune and was very difficult to make. It wasn't like Draco was the first to try this, but the problem with dynamic runes was that they required much more mana and soul energy than static enchantments. If a typical static enchantment needed one low-grade soul stone, a typical dynamic enchantment needed a medium-grade soul stone or two at the least, or it would fail to activate. Draco decided on this enchantment and used 5 medium-grade soul stones to activate it. The more soul stones used, the higher the chance of activation. If the amount of soul energy was beyond what was required, the excess went into increasing the enchantment's potency. With a smile, the fellow watched as the eyes of the dragon's head in the crossguard lit up and the sound of a dragon's roar spread over a large area around the cave, startling all living things in the vicinity. Before Draco could do anything else, a screen popped up before him. Congratulations on creating new weapon, unnamed, sword, rare. 145% EXP. Special title, Pioneer. 200 gold. 200 reputation with the Trade Skill Association. Unnamed, one-handed sword. ATK SPD, 6. DMG, 45 to 80. Effect, Fire Mastery plus 10, Damage Boost plus 13%. Draco wasn't surprised by this. Apart from militaristic universal powers like the War Maniac Pavilion, there were organizations with similar rank that didn't focus on combat like the Trade Skill Association. This was a gathering of elite crafters who focused on achieving the pinnacle of design and creation. Most of the upper echelon of the Trade Skill Association were fanatics who spent most of their time in their work. It was only the lowly members who'd handle meager construction jobs in order to win contribution points within the organization, like those who were hired by Draco to build his residence in Cario City. Normally, reputation with this organization would be a precious commodity for majority of trade skill players, as the comparative value of reputation to contribution points was like platinum to bronze. What Draco had made was a unique type of weapon with a relatively unique physical design as well as an ingenious enchantment. Creating something that wasn't already produced would naturally astound the world and earn favor with those fanatic crafters. A special reward for creating a unique design was that one could sell the recipe for it to bigger buyers and NPCs. If Draco took the basic mana potion design he got as a drop, he could only sell it to other players and at a pretty low price. It could also only be sold physically, and not in a shop. However, Draco could quite literally mass-produce the recipe for the sword and sell it in auctions, to NPCs, or in shops he did or didn't own. First things first, he'd have to name the weapon. Seeing as there was an audible dragon's roar due to the unique design and enchantment, I'll call it Dragorugio. With that in mind, Draco decided to append a name to the weapon. He also used his own name, Draco, as the name of the creator of the design. Right after he did that, player Draco has created the unique sword forging design, Dragorugio. Players can now purchase the design from player Draco and achieve a 10% extra success rate when forging the equipment. At this point, players in the world who had opted to focus on the path of trade skills were utterly flabbergasted. They had long been sneering at those who chose to focus on combat and exploration, ridiculing them for letting a random unknown achieve all the glory. And before even 24 hours could pass, he gave them a resounding face slap. Combat-oriented players might feel that such a thing was a bit amazing since it was announced to the whole world, but those who had been trying to raise their crafting skills over the past few hours felt their minds imploding. Even with their shallow knowledge and experience, they were aware of how hard it was to achieve what Draco did. Forget creating a unique design, majority didn't even have access to a basic sword forging design. Naturally, players assumed that in order to craft, they needed recipes first. Despite how crazy and adventurous most gamers were, this fact would only be realized for a few months into the game, or so it was in Draco's past life. Majority were raising their levels the costly way, by refining, and refining. They had burned through their freebies long ago and had sold what few success they had in order to buy more raw materials. A single copper ore was sold at 1 bronze, so buying even a batch was 5 bronze. Buying 12 sets meant paying 1 silver. Aside from those who were lucky to sell to Draco, majority received pittance for selling their common stuff, assuming they bought advanced or master packs. Selling a single copper ingot to an NPC merchant only gave 1 silver. To most players, it seemed that they were earning profits, assuming that even 3 out of every batch of 12 was successfully refined and sold. However, Draco pitted them for being played with by the NPC merchants. The selling price of a batch of ore is ideally 5 bronze, but most sold it at either 10 or 15 bronze, giving the excuse that the ore was in high demand. That was true, since every player who chose smithying would be trying to madly raise their level through refinement, but the price increase was bumped by more than demand would push it to. The selling price of a single copper ingot was supposed to be almost 3 silver, but NPC merchants only bought it for 1 silver. After all, who asked these immortal adventurers to be ignorant? While it was an undisputed fact that players were making a profit, the NPC merchants were making even more than them. Selling these ores to other NPC crafters is how they'd make their profit off this transaction, as those fellows were aware of the full price. Draco finished up by completing the enchantments for the other Dragorugio swords. Once these swords were complete, he moved on to creating common iron and steel swords, spear, dagger, and great swords. Draco also crafted a few bows and crossbows with a type of wood that was of an uncommon variety. He directly enchanted these ones with common low-grade enchantments for swiftness and accuracy boost. After doing that, Draco pulled out some more orichalk.u.m. If anyone had seen his actions up to now, they'd be startled and awed but slightly rueful of his earlier wastefulness. But seeing him pull out another batch of orichalk.u.m with the intention to refine again, they directly forsake everything and duke it out with him in a life and death fight. Unfortunately, there was no one to stop this beastly fellow as he began refining again. Draco checked his trade skill levels as the ore was in the midst of refinement again. Level, 14. EXP, 19%. STR, 10. Dex, 20. End, 10. Trade skills, smithying, level 13, 39%, alchemy, level 3, 42%, enchanting, level 6, 24%. Draco had evened out his stats after reaching level 14. At rank 0, players received 5 points per level, and at rank 1 only 3 were given per level. Clearly, one needed to allocate their attribute points very carefully. This time, Draco came out with over 35 refined sets out of 70, which was exactly 50%. Even he himself was shocked by his absurd luck. After all, forging efficiency only gave him a 20% assured success rate. His smithying level was ultimately still at the amateur stage, but his success rate from there was roughly 3%. Where the remaining 27% came from, he had no idea. With this, he moved on to the action phase. This time, Draco was making rare armors with the same effects as the sword but geared towards defense. That's right, Draco was trying to make custom set equipment. The difficulty of creating a unique design was almost 100 times less than creating a minimum 5-piece custom set design. After all, not only did each of the set items have to have a unique design, they need to possess a synergistic connection. They needed to be able to support and merge together to create new effects when more were equipped together. These new effects could either be intentional or unintentional, depending on the skill of the creator as well as the circustances and luck. Most crafters who were able to create unique sets hoped for the latter, because unintentional set effects were more or less an icing on the cake. Why? Because the intentional effect would still be present. Getting an additional unintentional effect was like hitting a jackpot on a gambling machine. Draco himself was hoping for one, but wasn't counting on it. He'd need some serious luck to acquire such a boon at his low level, so he was aiming to make a simple set. The set consisted of a chest plate, pauldrons, arm guards, and knee guards as well as a cloak. Aesthetically, the set looked pleasing to the eye. Draco set the color tone for the armor to be dark blue in color, while the cloth material that was underneath the armor pieces were a light blue. Author's note: essentially the armor he wears on the cover. However, he reserved that for his own version. After all, the default coloration of orichalk.u.m was brownish red, so the other sets were made in that color. It took more than a few hours to get everything together. When he was done, Draco smirked with satisfaction. While the orichalk.u.m he had wasn't enough to make exactly 15 sets, he was able to make 12 sets, which was enough. Just as he wanted to check the stats and effects for the items, the dragon soul in his body emerged and roared into the sky, causing a meteorological sensation to occur. Its bright eyes shot out a golden beam onto the blue set that Draco made for himself. A noticeably smaller amount of the beam was split into the other sets. Draco heard a replying roar from the set equipment that shook his whole abode and sent him straight into unconsciousness. Chapter 25, Unprecedented Achievement. When Draco finally awoke, he was met with the sight of 13 sets of equipment glowing while hovering in midair. 12 of them were glowing with a duller brightness while orbiting around a central set that was blue in color. The central set glowed with incomparable brightness, and faint sounds of growling could be heard from it the moment any of the weaker sets even tried to get too close to it. It was like watching a bunch of fawning fellows trying to hug the thigh of a stronger person. This surreal sight had Draco speechless. He was the one who made that, right? Why the strange theatrics? Draco could guess that the resonance between the dragon soul and the Dragorugio set had prompted the divine soul to bestow it with a blessing. Any ingrate could put that together based on past events. The only question: why was there such a strange reaction? What exactly did that tiny dragon do to these pieces of equipment? The tiny dragon in question snorted unhappily from Draco's inept description of its natural splendor. However, it seemed a bit exhausted, so it refrained from punishing Draco at the moment. Draco approached the set equipment and checked one of the descriptions to see exactly what the deal was with them. When he did see the changes, his previous oath to never be shocked by anything was immediately broken as his eyes widened and his throat caught. Dragorugio, one-handed sword. Rank, semi-epic. ATK SPD, 25. DMG, 235 to 400. Effect, Fire Mastery plus 150, Damage Boost plus 190%. Dragorugio, Chestplate. Def, 3000. Effect, Fire Resistance plus 1500, Defense Boost plus 250%. Dragorugio, Pauldrons, 2. Def, 1000. Effect, Fire Resistance plus 750, Defense Boost plus 125%. Dragorugio, Arm Guards, 2. Dragorugio, Knee Guards, 2. Dragorugio, Cloak. Def, 100. Effect, Fire Resistance plus 150, Defense Boost plus 25%. Dragorugio, Set Equipment, 5-piece. Effect. With 2 pieces equipped, grant the passive skill Flame Master. With 3 pieces equipped, plus 15,000 fire resistance. With 4 pieces equipped, plus 1,000 fire mastery. With 5 pieces equipped, grant the active skill Fire Domain. Flame Master, passive skill. Fire damage plus 10%. Fire resistance plus 10%. Fire Domain, active skill. Effect, create a fiery domain in an area of 50*10 yards around user, which boosts damage and movement speed by 5% and reduces enemy defense and attack speed by 15%. Duration, 30 seconds. Cooldown, 5 minutes. Draco was shook to the point that he almost fainted again. The stats and benefits of the set were above average for semi-epic items, and the passive as well as the active skill were a little bit better than most. However, what blew his mind was the fact that he, as an amateur rank blacksmith, had created a semi-epic set. Creating a set and crafting a set, as stipulated before, were two different acts with differing difficulties and rewards. To craft a semi-epic set, one would need to be an expert ranked blacksmith with a minimum level of 55 within the rank to achieve a stable success rate of 15%. To create one, however, one must be a master at the very least, with a minimum level of 70 to do so with a 10% chance of success. And now, a level 13 blacksmith had created a semi-epic set. This was an unprecedented act in the history of Boundless over Draco's 2 lives. This would astound and flabbergast just about every hidden power in existence. A screen popped up before him. Congratulations on creating new semi-epic set, Dragorugio, medium, melee. 5000% EXP. Pioneer titled upgraded to Inventor. 50,000 gold. 6,000 reputation with the Trade Skill Association. Inventor, special rank. 15% additional success rate when crafting regardless of item rank or type. Author's note: I noticed I forgot to state what the Pioneer title does. It's essentially the same as this one above, but with only a 5% bonus. Player Draco has created the unique semi-epic set design, Dragorugio. Players can now purchase the design from Player Draco and achieve a 10% extra success rate when forging the equipment. In another location on Cario continent, an old man with a long beard and thin eyebrows was seated on a bench while tinkering with some items. His eyes were a dull silver and his head was almost bald, with only a top knot keeping his scalp from being completely bare. He wore a loose yellow robe with no other adornments than an insignia of a hammer, cauldron, needle, bench, flame, and pen embroidered into the material in the shape of a badge. Currently, the fellow was frowning heavily while heaps of half-finished designs were arrayed around him. He held a paintbrush in his hand which had frozen mid-design. With an audible sigh of frustration, he scrapped this one too and put it aside before taking a fresh sheet of paper. Standing behind him was a level 80, rank 2 female attendant with above-average looks and a pretty slim build. She stood ramrod still, not even daring to breathe loudly in the presence of this man. After all, he was a level 350, rank 6 entity called Inventor Doug. He was one of the 3 Grand Elders of the Trade Skill Association and the most powerful of the 3 in terms of combat ability. However, his crafting ability was slightly below his peers, hence his desperate attempt to create a legendary item and reach Grand Master rank in his trade skill of choice. He was, however, stuck in this endeavor. After all, legendary items were thing even an existence like Draco, who had almost reached rank 7 in his past life, hadn't seen yet. Wanting to create one without being rank 7? What dog thing was that? Did you think you were a protagonist? Hence, he could at most do 50% of the design before freezing and being unable to continue, not due to lack of ideas only, but suppression from the material world. Sigh, if only I could acquire some form of outside help to complete this design. Even if it wouldn't be my own strength, the inspiration provided would be of immense help. Suddenly, a notification popped up in front of this strong existence. An immortal adventurer named Draco has created the unique semi-epic set design, Dragorugio. Even his attendants saw the same screen and the same expression of astonishment flashed over both their faces. However, Inventor Doug suddenly burst into raucous laughter. Ha ha ha! I knew the heavens hadn't given up on me. Where there's a will, there's always a way. While laughing uproariously, his form suddenly blurred and disappeared. Draco was astounded by the rewards given for creating a semi-epic set. He didn't get half as much when he did same in his past life. However, thinking about it, it made sense. After all, it was still within the first week of Boundless release. Any person in the know would be aware that there was no way for some immortal adventurer who just appeared in the world to possess the ability to create such a weapon without outside help, most likely with some rare crafting treasure. Rare crafting treasure. Oh shit. Draco's face paled when that realization hit him on the noggin. His surprise was doused like a weak flame and replaced by limitless fear. Without wasting a single second more, he gathered everything he had into his inventory and blinked away. The moment he did, a wave of intense pressure landed on the cave he had made his humble abode for crafting purposes. When that unseen pressure swept through the cave, it realized that there were some slight spatial ripples that occurred a while ago. However, it was impossible to track the destination of the one who caused them. Richmond was an apex hidden power who was rank 7. How could a measly rank 6 fellow think to track his herald? Then what would be the point of taking Draco in at all? Sigh, this lad. He didn't even wait for this old man to discuss the Deo with him. A voice filled with regret sounded in the area. The form of inventor Doug appeared and perused the area with his eyes. Yet, who would have thought he used the cave I used to craft in before I reached expert rank? This fellow and I really have some fate. Ah, the nostalgia. Doug stood there with a wistful smile on his face, as he seemed to reminiscing on good times. Suddenly, a spatial tear was ripped open beside him as Richmond came through with Nakayu hot on his heels. Doug calmly turned to face the newcomers with an amiable smile on his face. Lord Richmond, it is good to, ack. He bowed and gave a respectful greeting to Richmond due to the difference in tiers between them, but his words caught in his throat when he saw who stood behind Richmond. Demon. His voice became shrill as he pointed at Nakayu with almost infinite fear suppressing his very rationality. Not good. I must run. Doug couldn't care less about slighting Richmond with his lack of manners. The only thing that existed in his mind was to escape. In fact, all his brain's cognitive abilities were whirring at insane speeds, calculating how he could run away even faster. Doug's reaction wouldn't even make Richmond angry because he understood and even sympathized. Any hidden power that was below rank 7, level 390 should forget about even interacting with Nakayu. Mephisto was a bona fide rank 7, level 385 existence, yet he was played with by Nakayu in so many ways that he regretted being almost undying. He was thoroughly traumatized to the point where he would rather forego his plans to invade the human world due to one man. Nakayu, who had been looking around for traces of Draco, saw the fellow trying to run from him and chuckled with an amiable smile. While reaching out with a grab, he said, "This fellow here, since you dared to show yourself, you should be bullied by me for a few rounds before leaving, don't you think?" Doug, who was about to teleport away, was suddenly stopped in his tracks and slowly pulled back towards Nakayu's waiting arms. A look of incomparable regret and fear was colored over his face. "And all you good fellows observing on the side, did you think this ancestor didn't notice you? Since you also decided not to leave, I'll play you to death for a bit." His other palm grasped towards the void in a sweeping motion. Those hidden powers who had been watching on the side immediately teleported away with looks of total terror on their faces. Since they were still in a semi-corporeal state, they were easily able to resist Nakayu's pull enough to escape. There was also the fact that Nakayu made a grab towards multiple targets instead of just one. F.U.C.K. All those fish escaped. Oh well, at least I can vent on this fellow here. Nakayu's voice sounded as if he had been cheated out of something he rightfully deserved, and Richmond gave him a look of disdain for it. Lord Nakayu, if you don't let me go, our trade skill association will duke it out with you." Doug shouted out while trying his hardest to escape. "Eh? What dog thing is that? Am I supposed to be scared? F.U.C.K, for threatening your father, you will feel my wrath." Nakayu's voice became incensed as he put in more power to his pull. Doug's slow attraction to him became a strong one, and the fellow regretted his rash words. In his fear, he forgot that even the war maniac Pavilion treaded around this fellow carefully. "Lord Richmond, I will personally refine and craft any item you want if you save me." Doug's voice was shrill as he clutched onto the last lifeline around him. Richmond just looked at the fellow in the eyes and then resolutely looked away. Doug's heart sank to his asshole when he saw that. Richmond had made his stance clear. Offending this madman for you, who cannot even make legendary items, Was not worth it? No. 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 Save me. Save me. A high-pitched cry and evil laughter resounded in the area around the cavern, sending anyone and everyone around into an uncomfortable mood. Draco blinked into the guild outpost and sighed with relief. He was safe now. While lamenting his fate, he opened a city portal scroll and returned to Cario City. After all, he still had potions and poisons to make. Chapter 26, Potion Making 1. Appearing in Cario City, Draco first headed for the local Trade Skill Association headquarters. This was the place where he could utilize the best crafting stations and rooms for his purposes. Even the stuff at the cave he was at before wouldn't be as good. This was due to the quality of materials that were present in such a location. Of course, the quality of what you could use depended on the money you had on hand. Draco entered the biggest Trade Skill Association branch with his Battle Maniac title equipped. Inside, he noticed that the furnishings were not as lavish as the Merchants Association, but higher than the Lands Commission. Here, Draco was received by an aide who was, surprisingly, a male. "Hello my lord, do you need any help?" His voice was reasonably respectful, but not as odd or subservient as other servers who were faced with his title in other organizations. This fact surprised Draco, but meant little to him after thinking about it. Maybe because it was a combat-oriented title? After all, trade skill crafters had no need to be subservient to a musclehead as they tended to put it. Thinking along those lines, Draco shifted to his inventor title. "I would like to rent your best alchemy room for a full day," Draco requested with a loose smile. However, his simple request made the aide pale suddenly. This fact surprised Draco. Was there something going on today that made accessing those rooms a problem? My lord, that would be my pleasure." His voice was shaky and showed that he was thrown into the pits of fear. Draco literally felt the gaze of the aide before him shift to one of total obeisance. Paying no mind to the theatrics, Draco let the aide handle the procedures. What frustrated Draco was that everyone else they approached to handle the processing also reacted the same way, wasting his precious time. When Draco made his opinion known, it was as if he had slapped a nest of bees as everyone fell over themselves to get him nice of comfy. Majority of the subsequent process were skipped over when he had shifted his title over. Draco guessed that his inventor title was most likely the cause, rather than his wish to spend money. Normally, renting the best alchemy room would come to 300 gold per hour, which was an abhorrent amount. Then again, what right did poor people have to request for the best services in a service-oriented establishment? Clearly, this pricing was meant to filter out a large majority of people, leaving only the true masters. However, as a side effect of his title, all fees were waived. This was a pleasant surprise to him. Not counting his recent windfall of over 50,000 gold, just the remainder of the 3,000 he had would be enough for a few hours of intense work. Another benefit that came with the crafting room was delivery services of materials. Sort of like room service. You placed a request for materials and paid a reasonably lower cost for them to have them delivered to your crafting room. Naturally, the quality of your room decided which tier of materials you could access as well as which ones would be free due to your patronage. At the highest room, everything minus legendary materials were available for Draco to use and abuse as long as he had money. Epic materials were up for sale, meaning that Draco could craft epic and legendary equipment or potions as long as he had the funds. Which was his plan. After being led to his crafting room on the top floor of the large establishment, Draco was admitted into a room that seemed like a whole new world. Before him was an endless expanse of plains with fresh low-cut grass and bright, warm sunlight dripping from the beautifully blue sky. It was at a perfect room temperature that made one feel like they were wrapped in a warm blanket during a slightly cold night. Draco wasn't too surprised by this, after all, he had crafted his mana sword in a similar room. There was no visible workstation in this picturesque world, and a beautiful female aide walked up to him to offer an explanation on how to use the room. Draco waved her away, saying that he knew what to do, much to the aide's regret. She was damn tired of standing like a statue while serving old geezers with her respectable pay. Seeing such a handsome young guy who was immensely successful and promising, she felt her heart beating faster. However, the moment she tried to score some brownie points, she was brushed off. She sighed internally and cursed fate for making fun of her like this. Draco waved his hand while willing a cauldron and a work table to appear before him. Immediately, the ambient energy in the room surged into the shapes of a common-looking cauldron and a simplistic table with an alchemy set on top of it. This was how one operated this room. Unlike typical rooms where physical equipment was used, one used the energy of a whole world here to coalesce their tools. Another fact was that alchemy required worldly energy to create better potions or poisons. Same went for blacksmithing and or enchanting. When using common rooms, one would have to share the basic worldly energy that permeated the boundless continent with every other living being. It was the difference between having a 4.5G router with 32 people connected and a 4G router with only one person on it. While the ambient worldly energy in the room wasn't able to match the real world, it was still 1,000 times more potent than using the dregs of the energy in the boundless world. Worldly energy was not useful at the lower levels. That was why Draco was unbothered when making his sets out in the wild. Draco knew that if his dragon soul had the chance to imbue the same set equipment in this small world, they'd probably come out as semi-legendary. That was the same tier as his old mana sword, which had been hailed as the most powerful player-made weapon out of all the creations that 7 billion players could make. Since his old abode was nuked and he was now under the scrutiny of all the hidden powers, Draco decided not to hold back and astound them again. Well, that was only a remote reason. The real reason was so he could get another hefty reward from the system. 50,000 gold coins was no joke at this stage of the game. That was 500 platinum. Hellscape had at most 5,000 platinum as liquid funds and 100,000 platinum overall. While that couldn't measure up with a flimsy 500 platinum, the difference was that one belonged to a guild that functioned like a company while the other belonged to an individual. Those who understood how the world worked would understand this statement. If he could reach 1,000 platinum, Draco could buy out more lands and opportunities to expand into other kingdoms and empires, something he rarely did in his past life. It all depended on his performance now. While destroying Zane's outpost would gift him immense rewards, that was for a whole other purpose that he had already pre-planned. Draco pulled out 3 epic ingredients directly: Hydra Egg, Flood Dragon's Blood and a reverse scale of a 2-winged noble Wyrm. These ingredients were naturally related to his namesake once again. Draco was naturally hoping to luck out and have the dragon soul imbibe the potion he planned to make due to its relation to it. Still, he wasn't too hopeful of that, as he could see that the fellow was quite exhausted after the previous effort. Still, there was a lot of mayhem he could cause with these 3 ingredients as the main. Naturally, a potion couldn't be made with such small materials. He had to add a bit more to facilitate a fusion between these items. The process of alchemy was similar to blacksmithing, in that there were 3 stages with the same 3 terminologies: preparation, action, and completion. The preparation stage here referred to the grinding, mixing, and filtration of the ingredients. This focused on prepping your stuff to be properly concocted inside the cauldron. To get the best out of the ingredients before the event, a good alchemical set was needed. The action stage was simply chucking in everything at timed intervals and stirring the pot carefully in a set pattern. Here, anything could go wrong, whether mistiming of ingredient addition, bad mixing capabilities, presence of impurities, or not enough control over worldly energy. The completion stage wasn't a pop-up menu this time, but an actual action that one needed to manually perform. This was extraction. One might think, nonsense, why must collecting the potion or poison require a new stage? Is it not simply grabbing the cauldron and pouring its contents into a basin? The answer would be no. Unfortunately, the collection stage was a bit complex. One needed to utilize worldly energy to coax out the finished potion into whatever container you plan to house it. The quality level of the potion depended on how well you could handle the completion stage. For example, Draco could use these epic ingredients and go full Harry Potter during the first two stages, but if he messed up the last stage, the best he'd get would be a rare potion, instead of an epic or higher. Similarly, Draco could use uncommon ingredients and end up with a rare potion depending on how well he handled the final stage. Hence, alchemical ingredients never depreciated in price, but rather appreciated. Because there would only be more alchemists appearing and getting better at their craft, but resources were finite. Since every alchemy ingredient would be useful to even a grandmaster, naturally the prices would reflect as such. It was easier to nurture a trade skill player in blacksmithing or engineering rather than alchemy. Draco began the preparation stage by filtering all his ingredients over and over again. Naturally, the quality of filtration boiled down to his level in alchemy. With his amateur rank, he could barely cleanse the basic ingredients, much less the epic ones. Hence, he had to do it over and over again and progress slowly with it. Naturally, his alchemy level rose slowly every time he performed this act. However, this hardly affected his level as Draco was now level 14. Even though he had received 5000% experience due to the Dragorugio semi-epic set design, he had put it on hold. Honestly speaking, there was no such option in Boundless to postpone rewards. However, Draco had long guessed that with his acts since launch of this game, the AI would be paying extreme attention to him. After all, it wasn't a monotonous machine, but an entity with extreme intelligence and the ability to grow. If the AI theoretically had two eyes, the right one would be permanently locked onto Draco while the other would be watching the rest of the boundless world. Draco was proven right when his request to have his experience reward postponed was answered. Frankly, it wasn't anything like VIP treatment, but the AI was just immensely fascinated with Draco that acceding to a small request like this wasn't much of a problem. After filtering the items until he reached alchemy level 7, 45%, Draco began working on the three main ingredients first, by grinding them into usable paste. This sounded easy on paper, but it was easy to mess up here by losing effectiveness of the material by grinding away a good part. Draco treated each ingredient carefully as if he was handling a piece of priceless jewelry. His method was slow but sure, his sense focused on the process throughout. Naturally, for alchemy, Draco had his own technique here too. He called this one refined star technique. The name was born due to his usage of control to both monitor and assimilate with the concoction as well as how he handled it. In the preparation stage, this technique was out in relative force as he grinded and mixed the ingredients that needed to go together. After all, some ingredients couldn't mesh until entering the cauldron. Once Draco was done with this stage, he first put in the flood dragon's blood as that was the most volatile ingredient. The whole time, he had to be careful when filtering this material and dared not mix it in any way. After throwing it into the cauldron, Draco immediately threw in half of his basic ingredients, all of which had a calming effect, into the cauldron and saturated it with as much worldly energy as he could muster. For the whole 5 minutes he stood over the cauldron, he sweated quite heavily as he had to pour in unholy amounts of worldly energy into the mixture to keep it stable. If he had been in his cave, this would have required 300 times more effort than now. Draco had never heard of someone crafting an epic or higher potion in the outside world. Anyone who could do so was either a true god or an unparalleled prodigy. When he ascertained that the mixture was stable enough, he threw in the reverse scale of the two-winged noble Wyrm. This ingredient had the highest power of the lot, but was far less volatile as the flood dragon's blood. Draco threw in the remaining basic ingredients and entered a state of total focus as he poured in more worldly energy into the concoction. After approximately 3 minutes, he had stabilized the concoction and brought everything into perfect equilibrium. Now comes the problematic part. Draco frowned as he took out the Hydra egg, which was, surprisingly, the main ingredient of this potion this time around. Instead of cracking the egg during the preparation stage, Draco had only let the purest worldly energy he could control pass through the egg and filter it. Thanks to his ability of control, it didn't need to be mentioned about his adeptness at handling worldly energy. Among both players and NPCs, if Draco said he was number 2, no one would dare to say they were number 1. Even other control masters would pale at Draco's ability at control. After all, he came from an era where usage of control had been developed upon to a high limit. In this timeline, control was so new that its official name had been granted less than 5 months ago. How could one compare a mobile game player to a PC player? This was a similar situation to that. Draco carefully placed the egg into the mixture in its whole form. The mixture didn't react explosively like before, but just surrounded it and began breaking down the egg from its outer layer. But how could the egg of a fully grown Hydra be dissolved by this concoction so easily? If it could speak, it would say, "Haha. What dog thing is this? Wanting to break this handsome uncle down? Keep dreaming." Also, while the other 2 volatile ingredients were a tier stronger, they had been diluted by calming agents, making them less potent. However, the sole reason Draco even added the 2 epic volatile ingredients was just to save time as the egg got dissolved. To speed up the process, Draco focused and used his void of perfection as best as he could to move all the worldly energy into the concoction to dissolve the egg. This created a horrendous cyclone in the small world, with a bluish-green miasmic entity rushing towards the cauldron before Draco. The aide who had been awed by Draco so far and swore on her ancestors to win his heart over was now dumbfounded. This. Not even those old farts could sew this. What? Who is this fellow? F.U.C.K. I must win his heart by any means. Any woman who dares to challenge me will be this queen's enemy for life. While she began hatching plans in her own fantasies, Draco had begun sweating heavily. While he wasn't limited to a few seconds of use with his control abilities like in the real world, he still could use control for too long in this life. After all, his power of control wasn't as perfect as his past life. In his past life, he had trained his body and mind to perfection before grasping control. Here, his body was malnourished and his mind had been feeble as well as weak. Draco's situation was analogous to someone who had been a pro sports car racer who was forced to use a car with questionable roadworthiness to do the same type of race with the same lap time. Yeah, he could do it, but it wouldn't be as smooth as it was with the sports car. His skills allowed him to race it in time, but he would have to use much more energy. However, after continuous usage, this body would adapt, so he wasn't worried for the long term. Right now though, he cursed his past self over and over till it became mantra. It took over 4 hours of effort, with a healthy amount of breaks, to finish the action stage. When he was done, he took a good long break to recover his stamina. Thanks to Guinevere's necklace, Draco's stamina recovery was excellent. In a matter of minutes, he was back to top form. Now that he was done with the action stage, Draco moved on to the completion stage. Before that, he decided to check on his heraldry items from Richmond to make sure he was remembering the stats correctly. Total diplomatic immunity. Free selection at all rank 1 and 2 shops. Granted minor duke rank in all kingdoms with neutral reputation towards master. Granted passage to legendary and divine adventurers guild controlled dungeons. No teleportation fees to any town or city. Appearance deception, 9 forms. Movement speed out of combat, 5000%. Blink, 500,000 feet, cooldown 3 seconds. Total invisibility, 1 hour, cooldown 3 seconds. Nodding his head, Draco was satisfied. For this section, he would be relying on his insane movement speed as well as his ability to take any freebies from any rank 1 and 2 shop. Draco turned to his aide who was still lost in her fantasies and commanded, "Go to the nearest rank 2 shop and take all their stamina and mana potions." The aide was startled out of her reverie but complied gracefully after seeing Draco's herald's badge. Chapter 27, Potion Making 2. Draco returned his focus to his work. After all, the completion stage was where the truly arduous part of the work laid. While hovering over the lid of the cauldron, Draco slowly closed his eyes and entered a deep level of focus that was similar in intensity to before, but with a different nature. This was a milder and gentler type of concentration, where he was more in tune with the energy of the world, rather than forcing it into doing his will. Draco gently suggested to the worldly energy of this small world that it should assist him in extracting the potion from the cauldron. Naturally, the energy of the small worlds in the Trade Skill Association were geared towards crafting rather than battle. As such, it was easier to get it to move compared to the outside world. On that same note, the energy of the world of Boundless was far more amenable to usage in combat. Otherwise, why would combat-based classes dominate the world? After all, the AI had assessed human literature and history, ascertaining that such a concept was the more realistic and favored outcome by humankind. The worldly energy simply gathered around the cauldron, forming a thick miasmic entity of a bluish-green color. It hovered around and remained much more stable than when Draco pulled it for refining and concocting. The completion stage had a complex method to success. One must use the coaxed worldly energy, which varied per person, to form a sort of container and carry some of the concoction to be stored. This worldly energy would then be condensed into a proper bottle that housed the potion. Of course, the higher the quality of the potion, the higher quantity of worldly energy required to hold it. At the same time, the higher the quantity of worldly energy, the harder it was to transform it into a suitable container. This was where the difficulty with the completion stage laid. A better container could see your potion increasing in quality explosively, but a shabbier one would see it lose quality rapidly. Since Draco was working with a potion that had the possibility to be epic rank or higher, naturally the amount of worldly energy he needed to control was enormous. However, he wasn't worried about failure in the least. After all, as a control master who had focused on crafting in his past life, he had made countless epic and even semi-legendary potions. What had Draco troubled was that, even though he was aiming for an epic potion, a part of him wanted to make something of a higher tier. Naturally, the higher the tier, the better the reward. For example, if Draco's first potion was semi-legendary, one could not compare the rewards he'd get if his second potion was semi-legendary after the first being an epic one. Hence, the higher he could climb, the better the reward. In the face of such promising rewards, Draco was naturally putting in his all and more currently. He began scooping 500 ml of the potion into the thickest bubble of worldly energy he could control. Based on Draco's estimate, this bubble should be enough to hold a semi-legendary rank potion, much less an epic one. However, whether this bubble could take the potion to the semi-legendary level straight from epic was up in the air. Draco guessed that there was less than a 50% chance it would. If the dragon soul didn't intervene, it'd probably end up as a pseudo-legendary rank potion that was at the peak of its rank. Despite pondering all this, Draco began solidifying the worldly energy into a typical potion bottle, but with a roaring dragon with thick legs and a spiked horn as the motif on the body of the potion bottle. Once that was done, a bright flash occurred in the room, blinding Draco to the point where he almost cursed. Right at the moment when the light was about to subside, the dragon soul's eyes popped open and it left Draco's soul while staring at the potion bottle with interest. With a slightly excited toot, it shot out a beam of light that was 10 times thicker than the one it used on the equipment sets. This light split into the bottle and the cauldron, with the latter taking the lion's share. Draco half expected to either faint or see the dragon soul dissipate, but neither happened. In fact, the dragon's soul didn't even look the slightest bit fatigued. Before Draco could ponder exactly what the hell was happening, the little tyke grabbed the potion bottle in his hands and downed it in one gulp, burping with satisfaction afterward. Suddenly, it hit Draco. This fellow was pretending to be exhausted from the last boost. He was waiting for Draco to make a potion aligned with its dragon essence so that it could buff it and consume the benefits for itself. Easily seeing through Draco's thoughts, the dragon's soul gave a wide grin that was absolutely wolf-like in nature. Shameless. Outrageous. Draco cursed and swore, the dragon's soul taking all his dissatisfaction with a pleased smile as if it were enjoying Draco's anger and pain. Draco realized that for once, he had been played like a fiddle due to ignorance. The dragon's soul returned to his brain and immediately went to sleep with a comfortable smile. After a while, Draco could even hear loud snoring sounds from his soul. With a face that was so red it was about to burst, Draco reined in his anger and indignation. Humph, revenge is a dish best served cold. With an absolutely chilling smile, Draco returned his attention to the cauldron and continued extracting as much as he could. After 4 hours of work, he had gathered 24 bottles of potions. It would have been 25 counting the one the dragon's soul shamelessly swallowed, which wasn't too little, but not much either. Draco could pull almost 100 bottles of semi-legendary potions before, so this amount wasn't too impressive. But given his current body and the standard of the world, it was quite an amount. After placing them down together, Draco decided to wait for the obvious alert screen before checking the potion stats. Congratulations on creating new potion, unnamed, consumable, semi-legendary. 2000% EXP. All trade skill ranks +1. Legendary unique quest, refinement God's treasury. 200,000 gold. 10,000 reputation with the Trade Skill Association. Unnamed, consumable. Rank, semi-legendary, 70% effectiveness. Effect, allows one to gain 50% of a low-rank dragon's source energy. Damn. That was all Draco could force out with his currently chaotic mind. Getting a semi-legendary potion was definitely what he wanted and the rewards were a little more than what he expected, so that was all good. But it was the effect of the potion itself that astounded him. Every existence had a state of being that was ranked. A mortal was under a superhuman was beneath a demigod, and so on. Although the state of being rankings weren't split into a rigid and linear hierarchy, it was still there. Dragons were beings of origin, meaning that they were there when the world was created, so they had admin rights over the world. Their ability to manipulate worldly energy would have even true gods lament. Draco always assumed his dragon soul belonged to a low-ranked dragon, but clearly he was horribly wrong. For a single breath of a fragmented soul to create a potion that could permanently transform a simple mortal into half of a low-rank being of origin like a dragon, this was on the level of the elixir of youth. Before, Draco had ingested the legendary potion from Richmond that granted one ability point to allocate freely. That potion had caused a huge uproar in his past life and crippled a player's account. However, what happened then would amount to 1% of what this potion would cause if its effects were released. However, Draco didn't have to bolt at this time. After all, he had already made waves once and now he was going to make another. Even a fool would see something was up. Also, the effects of the potion wouldn't be broadcasted, just the name and rank. He was also located in a separate small world, so no matter who, they'd have to obediently wait for him to come out. He decided to name the potion Dragon's Blessing. Player Draco has created the unique potion-making recipe, Dragon's Blessing. Players can now purchase the design from Player Draco and achieve a 10% extra success rate when brewing the potion. The players in the world who were currently either crafting, adventuring, or relaxing leisurely were once again astounded. At this point, some started to believe that Draco was a hacker or the son of the developer studio's AI. The person himself finished tidying up his work table and cauldron before moving on to brewing more common potions like stamina, mana, health, or a combination potion that merged the effects of at least two of the types mentioned before. He also made a few miscellaneous potions like the damage increase, defense increase, speed increase potion, etc. There were a few enhancing potions, restoration potions, and even a few one-time use transformation potions. Players barely had the recipe for the restoration potions, yet Draco had gone ahead to craft almost all the other types of potions that existed in the game. After that, he moved to poisons. Thanks to the reward for crafting the Dragon's Blessing potion, he had been given 20 levels, or 1 rank, in each of his current trade skills. Draco had climbed from Alchemy level 7, 45% to level 36, 10%. After all, minus the reward from the game, his trade skill level would definitely be boosted for making a semi-legendary potion as an amateur alchemist. This made crafting these simpler potions and poisons much easier and quicker. After barely 4 hours, Draco had more than 10,000 bottles of different potions and almost 2,000 bottles of scarily toxic poisons. Because it really taxed his mind and body, Draco refrained from trying for another epic potion or poison. He definitely knew how to make one, but without the Dragon Soul's boost and coupled with his own weakness, it wouldn't be worth it. He wouldn't receive a great reward for it. After making a semi-legendary potion like Dragon's Blessing, Draco would need to straight up make a legendary potion to qualify for mouth-watering boons. Draco packed everything up into his almost infinite inventory and left the special crafting room. Unsurprisingly, there was a whole crew waiting for him outside. Draco could see various old geezers and hags arrayed in the chamber outside the crafting room, all with suffocating auras. After taking a cursory sweep of everyone, Draco moved to stand behind Lord Richmond before any of them could start coercing, threatening, or inviting him to their factions, making his stance known. If you can beat up this fellow whose thigh I'm hugging, you can do whatever you want to me after. Richmond had an amused look on his face while Nikao simply glanced at Draco once and looked away, purposefully acting cool. The others had an extremely bad expression on their faces, because it could be said that Draco gave them all a slight face slap. Haha, what a great young hero. I can see that you have great talent in both combat and crafting. This old man is the Grand Elder of the refined Star Abscon faction. Would you like to join us as an elder? One decrepit old fart who looked partly undead shot his attempt with his hoarse and discomfiting voice. The others glanced at him with chagrin for being so quick. Draco simply smiled and spoke calmly, I have no intentions of entering an agency. I prefer to walk free and unfettered. His answer made all the powers here either frown or sigh with regret. They were too slow compared to Richmond. What they didn't know was that Richmond didn't search out Draco, but vice versa. He then randomly chose to take him under his wing because, hey, why not? He never predicted that the lad he had taken on a whim would be such a monster. Fresh from the world of the gods, which was where NPCs believed players stayed, and yet so gifted. Free and unfettered? Yet you are the herald of that undying freak. A reasonably attractive woman who looked to be in her late 40s snorted with unhappiness while pointing at Richmond. Richmond himself just gave a bitter smile. Had it been anyone else, he'd have taught them a lesson, but could he do same to his own little sister? He had pampered her from birth, yet she had joined the Trade Skill Association as a Grand Deacon, unlike he who liked remaining free. Little sis, you don't have to be so mean to Big Brother, okay? Richmond pleaded with a distraught expression. Still, Big Brother, do you dare to claim you aren't an old undead? Look at you. I can't even marry you off with so many wrinkles on your face. At some point, his sister began haranguing him in public, to which all the other powers just smiled. After all, this sort of scene was nothing new. Richmond could only swallow his dissatisfaction and play yes man to his sister. However, she didn't make a request for Draco. She knew her limits with her brother, and as such, remained quiet afterwards, but the look she gave Draco was rather unkind. Draco himself sighed. It was a good thing he was an only child, otherwise. After that, the hidden powers began leaving one by one after introducing themselves and giving Draco a means to contact them in the future. Some gave Richmond some minor gifts to which he subtly passed on to Draco. While they were meaningless to him, to Draco, they were amazing. Majority were crafting materials that he could use to make epic and pseudo-legendary items and equipment. When they all exited, Draco was left alone with Richmond and Nakayu. Richmond just gave him some cursory advice to Draco, to which he listened with an apathetic expression. F.U.C.K. Old man. You can't even talk to your little sister well and you want to advise me? Can't you see that this daddy is self-sufficient? Draco cursed at Richmond while picking his ear, not even looking at the fellow. Richmond could only sigh and give up. After all, between him and Draco was no real master-servant relationship, just a relationship of convenience. The day Draco could tank the hidden powers by himself, he'd break off from Richmond. Of course, the silent Nakayu was jubilating inside at this. He was screaming at Draco to ask who he was so he could continue acting cool and wow the boy into becoming his disciple. Richmond eventually decided to leave and Nakayu obviously couldn't stay back if he wanted to act cool, so he was screaming internally for Draco to ask the damn question. Unfortunately for him, Draco simply left with room without even looking at him once. Nakayu could only curse and swear until his face became red. F.U.C.K. I have to go bully someone to let out some steam. Nakayu left with Richmond in a huff and a puff. The fellow was definitely going to make some hidden powers life miserable, all because of Draco. The fellow himself was now headed back to the guild outpost to stock up his shop with the basic items he crafted. As for the special ones, he had different plans for them altogether. He still had yet to allocate his experience and check his special armor set, but he would do those after sorting out the shop. When Draco entered the wilds around the guild outpost, he was about to activate appearance deception, 9 forms when he saw 2 women he thought he'd never have to see. In front of Draco, was Riveting Knight and Sublime Notion, who were also surprised at his sudden appearance. The 2 former lovers and unreconciled enemies finally meet again in this life. Chapter 28, A Weighty Question. Eva. Draco. The 2 involuntarily murmured each other's names while staring dazedly at the other. It was as if small grenades had exploded within their craniums. The 2 were aware of the other, but had refrained from approaching the other party due to the tense relationship between them. Who would have thought that they'd be face to face less than a week into their new lives? While Eva was unaware that Draco had reincarnated with all his memories, Draco was also ignorant of his benefactor's decision to allow Eva to recover her memories of her past life. In a sense, Eva was a reincarnator as well, just without her old soul replacing the new one. But then again, what was a soul if not coalesced memories? However, such debate was for another day. She had all her skills and abilities due to her old memories, just like Draco. She had been reasonably low profile though, unlike Draco because she didn't want to steal his limelight. Call it reparation. After all, while she did ruin his life, it was in another timeline. The Draco here had absolutely nothing to do with her, but emotions often interfered with mechanical logic. Draco too had largely pretended not to recognize her existence. After winning in their guild war and reincarnating into a new life, his perspective had been changed overtly as well as subtly. He was no longer bound by his hatred, but there was still some slight anger as well as sadness over the whole matter, and meeting her like this blew up those emotions into being. Eva felt immeasurable guilt towards Draco while he himself felt a chaos of emotions ranging from longing to hatred. The 2 just stood there in silence staring at each other for a long while. Hello. Where on earth did a handsome thing like you pop up? Sublime Notion's cutesy voice quickly broke the tension as she stared at Draco with a glint in her eyes. Draco couldn't help but shudder due to her look. While he did like how she looked, Draco had known her in his past life in a much different way. It was a fact that Draco was an only child. Back then, he had been a bit hapless and cute on top of being handsome, so Sublime Notion had taken a liking to him. She had been sort of a big sister to him, teaching him the ins and outs of being a playboy as well as helping him steal hearts. She had also been the one to connect Draco and Eva together and was happy beyond words at their relationship. It had been the three of them questing, crafting, and fooling around together. Draco's feelings towards Sublime Notion were purely positive, even during his hatred phase. She had tried multiple times to bridge the gap and mediate the issue, but Draco was too unwilling. But due to his feelings towards her as his big sister, he had never gone too far in the war in regards to Eva and her own families. After all, his parents were dead and he had no siblings. It would deal an irrecoverable blow to assassinate Eva's family as well as Sublime Notion's. Yet, here was his big sister eyeing him with a hint of sex.u.a.l interest. Why wouldn't he cringe inwardly? Unlike in the media, Draco found the idea of I.N.C.E.S.T really uncomfortable. Yes, the two shared no blood relation, but he still saw her as his real older sister. Still, she had managed to break the tension with her shameless inquiry. Draco thought about ways to exit this rendezvous, but something in him felt reluctant, probably his past attachment to these two. I'm here to build a foundation for my guild in this area. Crack open Draco's skull, rummage through everything with a magnifying glass, and you'd still be unable to find a reason as to why he didn't lie to them, instead speaking the truth. Sublime Notion's eyes widened. While Draco had his herald's cloak equipped, identifying him was a dream for current players. Otherwise, wouldn't the random fellows by the roadside have hounded him ever since the first announcement? But from his words, she was able to put two and two together. Randomly appearing here meant that the fellow teleported here. Since there was no means to do so officially, he couldn't be some random player, but someone who could teleport on his own. It meant either having a blink skill or an item/weapon that had teleportation abilities. Both of which were beyond the means of current players. The only player who could pull off something like this, would have to be that invincible Draco fellow. Wow! The arguably most powerful and knowledgeable player in the current world of Boundless was standing right before her. Sublime Notion's heart rate accelerated rapidly at the thought. He also said he was here to build a foundation for his guild, not his future guild. Taking his words literally, it mean his guild was already in existence, not yet to be formed. The only guild currently available was the Umbra Guild, whose guild leader was the Draco fellow. Everything lined up. But just to be sure. You're the guild leader of Umbra. Draco, right? Sublime Notion's words came out in a flurry, the excitement audible in her voice. Yes, that's correct. Draco's unhesitant reply nearly made her keel over from the blood rush. Sublime Notion didn't think of herself as cheap, but her tastes were limited to only successful males in fields of interest she shared. Even if Draco had $1 billion, he'd be unable to get a kiss from her, much less her heart. But as an avid female gamer and one who was currently enthralled with Boundless, Draco's power as well as success moved her heart to the point where she could hardly think. Is this it? Have the heavens finally bestowed me with my Prince Charming? With that in mind, her first act was to immediately rely on her tried and true weapons, her massive tits. She giggled cutely, intentionally shaking her impressive bosom, creating a scene that would have any individual with such a preference go crazy. Draco was unfortunately more of an ass man, but still it would be a lie to say that he wasn't moved. However, the instant that notion appeared, a sudden disgust bubbled up and crushed that image totally. It was the same as a young fellow having an attractive mother or aunt or sister. Naturally, such thoughts would pass through any fellow with agreeable levels of testosterone in his body's mind, but he would feel instinctive disgust. It was the same thing here. All right, Sublime, it's enough. I want to talk to Draco alone. Riveting Knight decided to bite the bullet and resolve the knot in her heart. She didn't know why the Draco in this timeline was so adept when the one in her memories took a longer period to reach this level, but she attributed it to the multiverse theory. After all, she was in an alternate timeline. She was well aware that under such theory, different universes might have similar events and histories, but there was always a diverging path. Draco was surprised that Riveting Knight would single him out. Could it be that his handsomeness had moved her to the point where she couldn't even hold back? That might be possible. He was the world's most dashing bloke after all. Sigh, the curse of handsomeness is one that I lament. If Riveting Knight could hear Draco's thoughts, she might just decide to continue their old war on the spot. Sublime Notion felt indignant at first, but gave up with a sigh. After all, these two best friends had declared themselves sisters. They also swore that no matter what, they'd never fight over a man. Even if they both loved the same man, they would unhesitatingly cut off all romantic ties to the fellow together. No guy was worth their eventual discord over love. In the rare case that they both loved the fellow to the point that they couldn't break off no matter what, they'd just marry him together. You can take anything from them, but their sisterhood was a thing they'd rather die than give up. This was why Sublime still sided with Riveting Knight, even though Draco was her unofficial little brother. While she shared pseudo-familial ties with both of them, her vow to Riveting Knight was inviolable. Sigh, you Eva, if you want some cuc.u.mber so badly, do you necessarily have to kick away your beloved sister like this? Sublime Notion asked with a mischievous smile. Scram! Riveting Knight roared. I'm scramming right now? I definitely don't want to see you receiving the blessing of Lord Draco here, tee-hee. Sublime Notion had to say that last part while skipping away since Eva tossed a throwing knife her way. She eventually left their field of vision altogether. When the two were alone, they both just stared at each other quietly, wondering how to deal with the elephant in the room. Draco decided to take that role since Riveting Knight had decided to kick away her friend. Might I ask why this beautiful young miss would like to talk to this dashing fellow here? Draco asked with a gentle smile. You, shameless. Riveting Knight couldn't hold it in and responded the same way she always did when Draco praised himself. Her entire reaction was done subconsciously, and it was the exact same as what she did when they were together during their past lives, down to the very breathing. Draco was stunned and so was Riveting Knight. She immediately regretted. Doing that was exactly like breaking up with your ex and immediately flaunting a new partner who was 90% similar to him, but slightly better. It was simply rubbing salt on old wounds by forcefully bringing back pleasant memories. Just as Riveting Knight was thinking about how to resolve the situation, Draco's next words stunned her to the point her soul almost fled. So, you reincarnated along with me, huh? Tell me, was it you who assassinated me? Draco asked with a smile that wasn't a smile. Draco wasn't clairvoyant or even the smartest fellow, but as a control master, he was privy to the infinite physical secrets of the world around him. Even though he hadn't activated his void of perfection, just unlocking it allowed him to have inhuman perception. He had seen her reaction. It was the same as the Eva in his timeline with not a single margin of error. Still, one could argue that no matter the timeline, a person was the same no matter what. Draco wanted to believe that, but couldn't, because he had also seen her eventual regret from her body language. What the hell was there to regret about when chastising an arrogant fellow? Along with that, Eva hadn't began reacting that way towards his antics until they started going out. Nonsense, would a cool beauty like Riveting Knight even respond to such a shameless question? She'd most likely just ignore the speaker and proceed with an important matter at hand. And Draco could confidently conclude this because he knew her best. F.U.C.K. If Draco claimed that he knew her second best in the world, not even the Heavenly Emperor would dare to claim he was the first. Riveting Knight initially thought about denying, but soon cast that thought away. The same way Draco knew her, She also knew Draco at the same intensity or even higher. Also, she had her memories from her past life, so she could instantly put everything together. Draco was killed and unbelievably reincarnated into this timeline. Armed with his skills and knowledge from his past life, it was exceedingly easy for him to achieve his current feats. In fact, Riveting Knight easily surmised that everything announcement so far was unintended and Draco was trying to be low profile. Otherwise, things would be 1,000 times more exaggerated. Realizing that, Riveting Knight had a bizarre feeling. Draco died and reincarnated into this timeline while she was the same, only receiving memories from the timeline Draco died in. Beat her to death with a piece of corn and she'd still refuse to believe it was all coincidence. I did not die, so I'm not a reincarnator. Well, I did die, but I was killed a few days after you. Riveting Knight's reply seemed contradictory, but it was the truth. While Draco's memories of his past life naturally ended with his death, hers didn't. She knew of the cataclysmic events that occurred after his death. Unfortunately, she died soon after for reasons she didn't want to remember. If you aren't a reincarnator, how do you remember the old world? Draco asked with a reasonable expression of confusion. I received memories of our past world only. It started just as Boundless began, her reply sent Draco into silence. It seemed like whatever allowed him to reincarnate also allowed the Riveting Knight of this timeline to possess her old life's memories. Why, he had no clue. It was painfully obvious that there was something big going on here, and he as well as Riveting Knight, were only chess pieces on the board. So then, do you know who killed me? Draco's tone grew sharp and there was a weird glint in his eyes as he asked the question. With a weak tone, Riveting Knight spoke another truth, I don't know. Draco was understandably disappointed, but he understood that knowing would do no good. Whoever had dared to kill him must have been backed by a powerful entity, something bigger than he could muster. After all, he was the leader of the goddamn cartel, the biggest underworld organization in drugs, prostitution, and money laundering. With his nurturing and 15 years of Boundless, the cartel had become 100 times more powerful than it was before. He had even managed to procure nuclear weapons, though just one warhead. Though, it was a strong deterrent to even the superpower countries of the world, much less corporations, guilds, or even a flimsy individual. Otherwise, on his climb to the top, wouldn't he have been killed like a C.O.C. Croach? Decisively dropping the matter, Draco breathed deeply before asking Riveting Knight the one question he had never received an answer to in his past life. Why did you betray me? 5 words but with a weight reminiscent of the conflict of 2 timelines. One question that could either bring prosperity or ruin to this timeline as well. Riveting Knight was quiet for a while, seemingly expecting the question. Her usual response was to remain silent and stare at Draco quietly, because circustances dictated that should she spill the beans, a tragedy would occur. But no such limitations existed here because the circumstances leading to that fateful event hadn't occurred yet in this timeline. As such, Riveting Knight took a deep breath before pulling her hood back and revealing her face for the first time in this timeline. This action stunned Draco to the point where he almost screamed in fear. Even in the real world, Eva kept her face hidden for majority of her life, not daring to reveal her beauty even with her powerful backing. She only ever showed her real face when it was just the two of them together. It was a sign of her absolute trust towards Draco and her love for him. After her betrayal, she had never shown him her face again. He had taken that to mean that she had broken all ties with him. He stood in the same spot as all the other fellows on Earth, never deserving to lay eyes on her again. To show him her face when the two hadn't ascertained if there were any watchers afar, what did this mean? Draco knew very well, but the answer scared him so much that he ignored it. Immediately pushing his void of perfection to its utmost limit, Draco assessed a radius of 50 kilometers around them before sighing with relief. No one was peeping on their talk. Even Sublime Notion had teleported away decisively. Assuming the upper score was 10, Rena would have had a score of 7 for her face, 8 for her body and 9 for her attraction. Maria would have had a 7 for her face, 10 for her body and 10 for her attraction. But Eva would have a straight 100 out of 10 for her face alone. Her body was a 6 and her attraction value was 6 with her veil on and over 1000 with her hood down. Had there been any other man here, he would have been driven into madness from Eva's sheer beauty. Draco remembered that his first reaction was to froth at the mouth as he fainted. It sounded like an exaggeration, but Eva's beauty surpassed what a mortal could reasonably lay claim to, entering the realms of the divine. She had bright green hair that was cut short, only reaching her shoulders. After all, too much hair and she couldn't wear hoods. Her eyes were pitch black, seemingly identical the abyss of endless darkness. This was what spawned her name Riveting Night. Eyes so black that they seemed to pull your very soul into a ceaseless labyrinth of intoxication. Eyes that could keep one riveted to the color of the night forever. Her skin wasn't as jade white as Sublime Notions but rather a healthy creamy color. Her face was like Draco's, angular and extremely perfect. She had full red lips that contrasted with her skin color to the point where one could only gulp at the sight, wishing to taste that bright cherry but never getting the chance. Her body was a lot more moderate, with a B-cup chest and a reasonably perky peach. It was nowhere near Rena, Maria's, or Zane's level that could induce infinite lust. However, the feeling that Eva invoked in males was different from what the three sexy ladies could induce. While these three could invoke feelings of possession, L.U.S.T. or even love, that was the limit. However, all one would feel when seeing Eva was worship and adoration. The very idea of her image being tarnished by any living male seemed disgusting, a feeling like imagining yourself kissing a toad. As such, she remained covered up for her own peace of mind as well as to protect Draco. However, Draco, you died and reincarnated into this timeline. I suddenly received memories of another life that I never actually lived. These are things that should logically never occur. Can you agree with me that there's a chance that certain illogical things might exist in the world? Draco felt uncomfortable with the train of thought she was putting forward, because the thoughts he had earlier were returning in full force with every word she spoke. Yes, that might be so. But what does that have to do with what occurred in our past life? Eva once again took in a deep breath and seemed to strengthen her resolution once more before dropping a bomb that blew Draco off the face of the earth. Would you believe me if I told you that the two of us aren't humans? Chapter 29, A Shocking Answer. As could be reasonably expected, Draco was stunned beyond belief. His first subconscious reaction was to doubt, but he soon came around to acceptance before Eva could even reinforce her revelation. It was because he knew Eva. She wouldn't lie about something like this, meaning she could only be right. Being a control master as well, her mind was immune to hypnosis or any form of illusion as well as external deception. Not even counting the fact that while Draco was more high-profile swordsman while managing the cartel and hellscape, Eva was more of a low-profile rogue, with her organization focusing on espionage and assassination. How could she be so easily fooled compared to him? I believe you. Eva nodded at his response. She knew he'd believe her. But she still decided to explain why she said what she did instead of leaving it at that. I might have to do a bit of talking, so please reserve questions until I'm done. Is that okay with you? She asked with a serious tone. Draco nodded in response. To explain how we're not human, I'd first have to explain the history of our world. As science has proven, there was an age before humankind, the prehistoric age. In that age, dinosaurs were the rulers of this primal world. She took a slight pause, arranging her words before continuing. These beings were then wiped out by a meteor that hit the Earth. After that, evolution saw the rise of apes who grew into Neanderthals and then humans. Unfortunately, this summary is slightly wrong. Humankind didn't evolve from apes, because we already existed before that. This further stunned Draco. If that was the case then, where did humans originate from? Let me correct myself. Humans did evolve from apes, but the source wasn't from Earth, but rather that same meteor. We existed as apex organisms that originated from a different galaxy in the universe but were blown away after being almost annihilated by another race. When we landed on Earth, our bodies had been shattered, but our cells were still active. Some of the weaker cells which were closer to the surface of the meteor were absorbed by nature and evolved into different beings. The highest of these evolutions was humankind. This is the main reason why humans can bond with most animals. It is a form of subservience to a higher entity on the genetic chain. However, all this, the evolution of humans and animals, was wrought by the weaker cells that fell out. So what about the stronger cells that were held within? Eva pointed at herself and then Draco. This is our origin. By this point, Draco was out of brain juice and his logic processing center was overclocking itself to comprehend Eva's words. The stronger cells couldn't simply evolve on their own, after all, we'd been annihilated. Over time, however, the energy of this lush world allowed us to merge together, eventually forming 9 beings, exactly 7 males and 2 females. Zeus the thunder god, Pangu the primal, Ila the primogenitor, Anansi the trickster, Gautama Buddha the wise, Lucifer the devil, Merlin the elemental, Morrigan the war goddess, Amaterasu the celestial. These 9 beings possessed power and abilities to rival that we call gods. In fact, some of them went on to become deities of various religions for the lesser humans that existed. However, a problem cropped up. Their genetic forms had diversified to the point where reproduction among them was no longer possible. As such, they had to merge with humans in order to have successors. Naturally, the choices for partners varied based on the personalities of these 9 deities. The 2 of us hail from different lineages. I hail from Amaterasu's lineage while you hail from Lucifer's lineage. There are various lineages in different countries that either remain low profile like that of your lineage, or those who go high profile like those under Ila or Zeus. So this is the reason for our existences. To explain why I did what I did, I needed you to be aware of this first. Now, you can ask questions, since the explanation for my actions is slightly tangential. Draco collected himself and parsed all he had heard so far. He acknowledged that it sounded a bit far-fetched, but it was straight from Eva's mouth. Naturally, his first question was, "How do you know all this?" "It was taught to me by my family." This is basic knowledge taught to any member of any of the lineages. Eva answered patiently. "How do the members of the lineage know this? Were they not annihilated cells?" Draco asked with a skeptical frown. "Genetic memory. We are higher beings. If our cells can survive being decimated and manage to recover autonomously, they'd certainly be able to retain ancestral memory." Draco nodded. The answer sounded a bit reasonable. "Do you know the circustances surrounding my family, or lineage?" Draco asked carefully. This was one of his more pertinent questions. Well, answering that bleeds a little into why I did what I did, so let's skip that." Eva's answer was a bit dodgy, but Draco decided to let it go. "Alright, so where exactly are the descendants of the lineages located?" Draco asked, though he guessed the answer. Eva replied, "Zeus is in Greece, Pangu's in China, Ila in the Middle East, Anansi's in Africa, Gautama Buddha's in India, Lucifer's in Italy, Amaterasu's in Japan, Merlin's in Britain and Morrigan's in Ireland." Draco semi-expected this answer, but he was surprised to find that Lucifer resided in Italy. That meant his ancestry was Italian one way or another, though his physical traits didn't look as such. Then again, Eva didn't look Japanese, so there was that. Draco indicated to Eva that he was done with his questions. He wasn't too interested in the history of the world, no matter how enlightening it was, compared to the knowledge of his heritage and why Eva betrayed him. To explain why I did what I did, I'll have to describe the political climate of the lineages. This is something left over by the deities themselves, after they broke through the atmosphere to head back to their galaxy for vengeance. In terms of relations between the deities, it boiled down to strength, rather than charisma. Out of the 9, the power classification is broken down into the upper 3, middle 3, and lower 3. The lower 3 consists of the lineages of Morrigan, Isla, and Anansi. The middle 3 consists of Gautama Buddha, Merlin, and Zeus. The upper 3 consists of Pangu, Lucifer, and Amaterasu. Naturally, power is the basic decider of everything in the world. The upper 3 were the rulers, the middle 3 were the advisors, and the lower 3 were the vassals. It was generally believed that the weakest lineage was that of Morrigan while the most powerful was that of Lucifer. However, in terms of strength, it was believed that Pangu was stronger than Lucifer and Morrigan was stronger than Anansi as well as Isla. However, the upper 3 knew that the strongest among them was actually Lucifer, followed by Amaterasu and then Pangu. Pangu had the highest physical strength, but his looks were a bit brawny and rough. This was to Morrigan's liking, but Pangu wanted Amaterasu, whose beauty was said to be so ethereal that even the dead forcefully revived themselves the moment she showed her face. Draco stared at Eva weirdly, which made her squirm a bit. At least Draco now understood why Eva was so unrealistically beautiful. However, Amaterasu loved Lucifer to the point of madness. Not only because of his power, but Lucifer was just too handsome that no woman could look at him and remain the same. Draco was startled. F.U.C.K, so that's why this daddy cannot get any reprieve from women. I knew my key to success had always been my handsomeness, ah. Eva's face became unamused when she saw Draco's arrogant and narcissistic expression pop up. She could practically guess his thoughts. Lucifer, even in the religion he founded, was described as the most beautiful angel, so it was not surprising, Eva explained with a dry laugh. Eh? He founded a religion? Wait, don't tell me. Draco asked with a shocked expression. Yeah, Lucifer was physical perfection and his power was potent, but he had the weirdest personality there was. He told Amaterasu that he found it exciting to be hated. Eva had a strange expression on her face when she recounted this. The two remained silent for a while before pretending to ignore what was just said. Lucifer did reciprocate her feelings, but Pangu wasn't going to have that. He secretly roped in all the other lineages to his side and declared himself emperor of the world and its creator. He wanted an empress that befitted his status and asked Amaterasu to fill that spot, to which she declined potently. Not wanting to give up, Pangu decided to challenge Lucifer for Amaterasu's hand, believing that only the strongest deserved her companionship. Lucifer naturally won, and this led Pangu to a berserk rage. He decided to declare war against Lucifer and Amaterasu as well as their lineages. This war in the shadows shook the world, but eventually ended in a stalemate. By that point, all the deities had broken through the atmosphere to head back to the superior galaxy they were from. It was the heads of the lineages who decided to compromise, after all the deities were gone and they were losing lives unnecessarily. That truce has been maintained until now. Eva's face darkened suddenly and her tone became a bit more strained. However, in this generation, there were 3 absolute prodigies born into the Lucifer, Amaterasu, and Pangu lineages who possessed the most potent bloodlines of their family. This wasn't a problem for the Amaterasu lineage, since the Pangu lineage still held onto their arrogance that our lineage were born to be their possession. However, for the Lucifer lineage, this birth was the precursor to a possible second war. After all, the Pangu lineage and the Lucifer lineage were irreconcilable enemies who ignored the truce and killed each other whenever possible. The lower lineages naturally didn't dare to do so, even if they could, while my lineage was practically ignored as an enemy. To have both the Amaterasu lineage and the Lucifer lineage birth absolute prodigies was a direct threat to the Pangu faction. In order to lower tensions, the prodigy of the Lucifer lineage had his bloodline crippled and sent into the mortal world to fend for himself. That prodigy is you, Draco. It was as if 1,000 explosions had occurred in Draco's brain. All his life, he had thought his parents were those he had until the age of 9, who then mysteriously died. He had been left to fend for himself all that while, scraping on an average inheritance to pay for the bills. He had grown up weak-minded and cowardly under adversity, making the current him believe he was pretty shit in all honesty. He only began to shine when he entered Boundless, which was a combat-based world instead of the peaceful one like Earth. In fact, his abilities almost impossibly skyrocketed after his fell into hatred phase, leading to the current him. So all his achievements were not through hard work and effort but talent. Not just any talent too, but crippled talent. So if he hadn't be crippled. Your talent was higher than mine originally, and we were originally supposed to marry when we grew up. This was what really scared the Pangu faction. After all, if the original Lucifer and Amaterasu, the two strongest, could reproduce, then their offspring would have had universe-rending power. Eva's face became a bit red when she spoke of this, and Draco had an awkward look on his face. Destiny really always had her way. However, they couldn't. But we, as their strongest inheritors to date, could. While it might not be as powerful as the child Lucifer and Amaterasu could create, it was still potent to destroy any opposing faction once mature. It was you who had been crippled and cast out because I was a girl and because the Pangu faction hated you more. Her expression became guilty and filled with shame at this point. Draco was a bit unhappy inside, but he understood why. Whether one liked it or not, while a male would have a harder time at the bottom, it was believed that it was what he should do as a man. There's nothing to it, you didn't make the decision after all. It was my useless lineage that chose to bow down in the face of adversity. Draco's words were considerably dark and filled with anger, but his face remained calm. Eva could only sigh on behalf of Draco's family. There was a deeper story there, but she wasn't qualified to share it. In our past life, and probably in this life too, your existence was scrapped from the minds of most since no one saw you as a baby. You also grew up in the human world without any form of monitoring, since if the Lucifer lineage dared to, the Pangu lineage would find you as well. That meant, when we were together and before that, I had no idea who you were. In fact, I might have never known if it wasn't for a certain accident. Accident? Draco asked with a frown. Eva's countenance became awful and remorseful as she continued on. You remember Local Lord, right? Draco's face also became unpleasant and filled with utmost hate. How could I forget that arrogant bastard? He was the one that. Draco would never forget the arrogant smile and laugh Local Lord made as Draco found him on top of Eva that fateful day. Just remembering that event almost made him fall into madness once again. Draco had to turn his head away from Eva and collect himself carefully. Eva was inestimably pained by this action as she felt her heart being shredded. Still, she knew she had no right to demand any less even with the truth coming out. After a while, Draco turned back and kept his eyes on his feet as she grunted for Eva to continue. With a weak and shaky voice, she did. Local Lord is the prodigy of the Pangu race. Boom. That was the sound of Draco's mind being blown wide open. Considering what he had heard so far, his brain had short-circuited when trying to instantly process her words. But, then why? It was Local Lord who discovered your identity, not me. How he did, he never shared, but he was known to have kidnapped some weaker females from your lineage to play with. He might have had some blood essence on hand in case he ever met you. You were crippled, but your bloodline is intact, although strongly suppressed, but it's there. This wouldn't have been much of a big deal on a normal day since you had been already cast out, but... Draco finished her words for her with a dazed voice. But we had ended up in a relationship still. Even if we were unaware, the fact still remains that we were together. It also gives the Pangu faction a reasonable excuse to kill me and start a war, saying that the Lucifer lineage lied, trying to have us produce offspring under wraps. Eva nodded with a complicated expression. It was either I acquiesced to his demands or a war between our lineages occurred. And so, you chose to prevent the war by acquiescing to his commands. Draco asked with a difficult expression but accepting expression. If this was the case, then he could reconcile his hatred and the two could possibly become friends, but never lovers. Choosing to save the world was a noble goal, but not at the cost of his feelings. After, he had been abandoned by these lineages, so he could give any more of a shit if they were embroiled in a war. Eva's reply dumbfounded Draco. Then why did you? She raised her face up and her expression was no longer convoluted, but incredibly fierce, with a large chunk of insanity being displayed. I did it solely because your life was at risk. Kaboom! Draco's mind firmly exploded and blood quite literally leaked from his nose and ears. His brain had literally damaged itself a bit from her words that were made with such an expression. Eva only made it worse with what she said next. Who gives damn about those lineages? If they want to fight, they can fight, I don't care. I don't care, I don't care, I don't care. As long as you were alive. My life, my dignity is trash compared to your existence. But that bastard that bastard? He threatened to kill you, arg. I couldn't let you die. If you died, I would kill anything and everything that had to do with your death, he. What even is the point of having all these people remain alive if you are dead? What is the point of my existence is you are dead? Irrelevant, he. That is what happened when you died in the other timeline, I killed and killed and killed. Kill. 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 He, ahahaha. By this point, Eva had descended into a scary state of madness where her words became less and less coherent. Her hands began pulling at the skin of her cheeks, ripping them in a gory and horrifying fashion. Her eyes began to twist and turn in their sockets, as if a demon were possessing her. It was a sight that would make any onlooker vomit with disgust and fear. She sounded like exactly what she was, a madwoman who was completely obsessed with something to the point of irrationality. This obsession wasn't the typical kind, it was the kind that encompassed one's own existence. It was the type that made logic redundant when the topic of their obsession was concerned. In that aspect, Eva was just like Amaterasu. Amaterasu had also descended into episodes of insanity when anything concerning Lucifer occurred. It was why Pangu had never bothered to try to kidnap her away because she would never be his until he shifted her obsession onto himself. Words from the author. Some aspects of this chapter has been changed to make things more palatable. Let me warn you ahead of time, the next chapter features a reconciliation between them. A good amount of my readers were triggered by this, hence the warning in the description of the novel. There were some aspects that were unpalatable to readers, but I plan to lighten them a bit. However, this had spawned a lot of negativity which I've had to endure for the past few weeks. Please, if you're the type to dislike reconciling with riveting night, stop reading. It was good run and I thank you for reading so far. If you're 100% sure you don't mind, continue on. But don't say I didn't warn you. Part 3 of the series ends here. If you enjoyed it, please give us a like and subscribe so we can be motivated to make even better videos in the future.